YouTube at Christo_radio if you'd like to hear more of my contributors. And you must come on at some point.
Right. I'll find a day when I wasn't busy.
Yeah, there's no fee. And of course, I'm going to be back actually Boxing Day morning at 6 o'clock. And I am going to, during that show, be making my world famous Bloody Mary as well in order to get rid of our hangovers. I say Bloody Mary, we might just drink champagne. So that's going to be that. James is next. It's Talk.
The UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a very good afternoon to you. It's just gone 2 minutes past 4 o'clock. It's Christmas Eve. This is Drive on Talk with me, James Maggs. I'm with you until 7 o'clock. So coming up, why are 1/5 of our armed forces not fit to fight? We'll also talk about last-minute Christmas present and cooking advice for you. We've got some travel updates and the reason 007 or James Bond isn't coming back to your screens anytime soon. And we've got a brand new feature. What would Margaret say? A Iron Lady joins us.
I cannot begin to describe how thrilled I am to be joining James Maggs on the Talk Drive Time show.
Oh, listen to that. Yes, indeed, we will be speaking to the very one and only Iron Lady and getting her thoughts and advice. Plus, we'll be talking about reform membership. It's set to become higher, perhaps even, than the Tories. Support for Labour, that's collapsed. So could we be looking at a new political environment in 2025? And indeed, with children losing touch with British culture, says the BBC. I want to hear from you this afternoon. How do you define British culture? And what threatens it? So very good afternoon. It's me, James Max. I'm with you until 7 o'clock here on Talk. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, I want to talk to you about defining British culture, because we have seen a big political shift in this country. So a backlash against the Tories, 14 years of, shall we say, turbulent leadership, changes of Prime Minister, changes of direction. And then, of course, leaving the EU and various other things that were supposed to lead to sunnier uplands that didn't seem to exist. And then, because they won a landslide, we have a Labour government that seems to be losing touch and losing support from pretty much everybody for so many different reasons. And when one starts to look at how this country moves forward, I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to look at Britishness and culture, and also what threatens it. And that's why I'm asking you, how do you define British culture? And what do you think threatens it? You can call me. It's 0344 499 1000. There are a whole range of different areas to this that you can talk about politics and politicians if you like. You can talk about a generation of children at risk of losing their connection to British culture, according to a BBC programming chief. She's a director of children's and education at the BBC. A lady called Patricia Hidalgo has raised concerns about the decline in programming for youngsters on commercial channels and streaming services. And this kind of prompted me to think of a wider discussion, because I wonder how you define British culture. Is it that we have a look at our history? Or is that history no longer where we should be looking for our bellwether? Is it that we look at the things that we watch on screens? Is it the things that we say? Is it our language? Is it books? Is it plays or cultural excitement, if you like, on our stages, whether it's music or film or theatre or actors? Or is it what's on our TV screens? Are we defined by the Christmas specials that years ago half the nation seemed to watch at any one particular time? I mean, how many people will be sitting and watching the King deliver his message? And does it really matter? Do we care so much about our royal family and our lineage? Do we care so much about the cultural ways? I mean, I watched, for example, last night, because I got home after the show yesterday, and I got home and I thought, what am I going to watch? And I was looking around and I was thinking a bit Wallace and Gromit and da-da-da, and I was like, no. And then suddenly it popped up and it said, oh, the whole series, series after series of To the Manor Born. Yes, please and thank you. Hello, Penelope Keith and Peter Burles. And I thought, I'll watch this, just because I just want to see. Oh, my God. 1979, I think that first episode came out. Was it that or was it 81? Anyway, either way, you could buy a big country manor for 860,000 quid. I mean, you can't buy a two-bed flat in London for that. Setting aside the money changes, I was watching, there are so many things that she said that you just wouldn't say today. Discussions about culture, discussions about identity, discussions about foreigners, discussions about blue blood, all sorts of things that you just wouldn't say today because our culture has changed so very much. So this is why I want to ask, well, how do you define British culture? Because if you have a look at the political attack on our countryside, that the whole way of countryside living is arguably going to be changed. The fact that we seem to have a desire to build all over our countryside, whether it's with new houses or electricity pylons or the ghastly wind turbines or anything else, that we don't seem to want to support the British pub in the way that we should do, the cultural institution that it is. So I do think that British culture is defined by food. I do think it's defined by our pubs and our little villages. I do think it's I don't know, defined by the churches and the church bells ringing and the various different idiosyncratic things that people do up and down our nation, either on times of celebration, bunting going out, Christmas lights, Christmas trees, whatever it may be. And it doesn't matter whether you're of that religion or not. So, how do you define British culture and what threatens it? So, what are the elements of British culture that you think are important? I mean, is it just going back to Shakespeare and his writing? Is it our great screen actors and actresses who adorn a world stage? Is it the contribution to popular culture that we make, whether it's through music, you know, Ed Sheeran, Dua Lipa, people like that, or alternative Harry Styles? or the songs that we write, going back to Beatles, Rolling Stones, those sorts of things? Is it our classical music, the wonderful organisations that we have that proliferate classical music and playing? Is it defined by artistic endeavours, or indeed our food? And then what food would you say? Would you say the great chicken tikka masala is what defines British culture? 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. You tell me. Meanwhile, let's find out about some of those big stories. I'm joined now by Vincent Moss, former political editor of the Sunday Mirror. Joins me now. Vincent, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, James, and happy Christmas.
Yes, happy Christmas to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me here on Talk. Before we get to discussing culture and cultural icons and various other things, Reform UK membership set to be higher than the Tories within a month. They're having a big push, but frankly, should one even get excited about the fact that a political party, I think our population last time I looked was about 70 million, and I think the Tories have got 130,000, and I think Reform have got 120,000. Nobody cares.
Well, I think it is exciting, certainly for Reform. I mean, it does look like they'll overtake the Conservatives within a month or so. They're virtually there. Still a long way behind Labour of 370,000 members, but Labour's fallen back from about 500,000 that it had under Jeremy Corbyn. Parties always tend to revivify in opposition. But I think the fascinating thing about the Reform growth has been how many young people are signing up and are attracted by it. Clearly disenfranchised by both Conservative and Labour offers, and there's a huge number of young people who can't get a house, soaring rents, saddled with huge tuition fees, very disaffected with the two main parties, and it's that I think is the most interesting element of the surge in Reform membership.
And I think it is interesting when you talk about that, because I think in the past there has been a view that maybe younger people are more going to be perhaps left-leaning in their views, that they're going to be more liberal when it comes to immigration and to legal immigration, and when it comes to cultural discussions. But actually, cultural relevance is important. And also when people are prevented from having access to, whether it's education or the services of the nation, or indeed, as you say, housing. And it used to be, if you like, a basic dream that home ownership was something that everybody at least could have an aspiration for. And yet you can be in a very good job, you can be paid really quite a lot of money, and you will not be able to afford to get that flat, to get that house, to get onto the housing ladder. And meanwhile, other people are being attacked for perhaps having done well and then being fortunate enough to perhaps have that second home, that they're in attack up and down the nation, that no longer is there an aspiration and agreement in this country that you should be able to do well through your own endeavours, and then that means going and buying more than one car or one house or something. That should be applauded rather than chastised.
I think that's exactly it. I mean, I live in a part of South London where many of the streets near me are empty because people have gone to their second homes. And yet there are young people in the same sort of borough who are paying £1,000 a month to rent a room. And even if they're on a really decent London salary, that sort of dream of buying a small one-bedroom flat or something is way beyond their means. Now, to people of my age, basically, I remember being a young person, earned about £20,000 a year. A one-bedroom flat within central London was about 3 times your income. So you could borrow some money and you could get on the housing ladder. That's impossible now for young people. And that's why many of them are attracted to different alternative and radical solutions, such as Nigel Farage here in the UK and other sort of parties that are offering something very radical across Europe.
Now,
because they've looked at the offer from the two main parties and they're just not satisfied with it.
You've seen politics over many decades here in this country. You've seen the rise, if you like, of political sort of forces and powers that have been very prolific, and perhaps the most prolific are the rise of Margaret Thatcher to power and her domination of the 80s and early 90s, and then, of course, Tony Blair and his dominance of politics. We haven't really had that sort of leader who's had an ideology that people have bought into. And maybe the only person who does have that is Nigel Farage. Is that part of his attractiveness?
I think he's offering something very different, but we live in different times. I think even in the times of Tony Blair, let alone Margaret Thatcher, the media didn't move as quickly. There wasn't social media. There wasn't such a proliferation of news channels and the rest of it. And politicians were given more time. We've got very short levels of patience now with politicians. We've had 14 years, effectively, of Conservative-led government, and people are already, in large numbers, fed up with Labour after just 5 or 6 months. It's incredible, really. And when people talk about Keir Starmer, as his polling shows, as being the most unpopular popular Prime Minister for 40 years. Well, the last popular Prime Minister who was this unpopular was, in fact, Margaret Thatcher. She started off very unpopular, but, of course, went on to win those huge election victories. So things can turn around, but it's much harder in the modern age for that to happen.
I suppose so. When one has a look at some of the other stories which are probably going to dominate discussions, 1/5 of the armed forces not fit to fight. Now, this is because of whether it's health or medical problems or issues. Should we be concerned about the ability of our fighting forces? We keep hearing that there are issues with it, with funding, and yet we keep hearing also that we've never spent so much on defence. Now, is it sabre-rattling by those who are in the military who inevitably are seeing an opportunity and wanting to raise more money, or do we genuinely have a situation that our armed forces are not capable of dealing with the new world in which we find ourselves?
Well, it is a problem, and these figures have emerged in response to questions from the Conservatives. About 16,000 people of the 71,000 troops we've got not fit to fight, either because they're sick or unwell or because they have limiting conditions, which means they can't be in certain weather conditions or can't be near noise. But I would say that the world battlefields, as we've seen, are changing in some ways. It's not as though we will ever fight potentially a traditional war where troops go into battle, although the sort of thing we are seeing in Ukraine and Russia, that probably isn't going to happen because the British public wouldn't stomach high casualty losses. It would be a drone-led sort of technical war, if you like. But yes, it's very worrying that at the end of the day, you've got 71,000, which is already a very low number in terms of the armed forces, and potentially 16,000 of those are not deployable. And this comes at a time when, of course, Trump and other world leaders are looking at increasing the pressure for us to increase our defence spending, which I think is about 2.3% of GDP. But there's pressure to get that even higher. The Conservatives committed to 2.5%. Labour's said it will, the government said they will go there, but haven't said when. So yeah, it's an alarming fact, and it goes in not just the armed troops. We've read about warships not being ready, battleships not being ready. So it's a huge problem. Yes.
What about the Prime Minister failing to rule out more tax rises? I mean, as you say, he can't be more unpopular or much more unpopular, even if he tried, frankly. But given the tax rises and the impact that they're already having on the economy and the prospects for economic growth, that we could see stagflation, i.e. inflation rising and growth either flat or falling. Is he going to have to raise more tax, or is he going to realise that, in fact, if he lowered the tax rates, he might actually get more in the coffers?
Well, that's the sort of perennial question, isn't it? I mean, the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, have said that it's possible that taxes may have to go up. We saw that in Q3 of this year that growth has flatlined, been revised downwards. I mean, Labour only just got in at that point. But one of the problems is there's a nervousness in the economy. People aren't investing. People are reticent about spending. Consumers aren't going out and spending as much as we would like. And that means that the growth isn't there. And that's a huge problem. And if the growth isn't there to fund public services, tax rises can't be ruled out. And going into the new year, that's going to question that's going to be facing Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and Keir Starmer more and more. And the government hasn't ruled it out.
Just finally to you, how do you, Vincent, define British culture, and what do you think threatens it?
I think this is a fascinating question. I heard you talking about it earlier. I mean, for me, it's an evolving thing. It isn't where it was, if you like, that John Major vision of cricket, and big fan of cricket and real ale and all the rest of it. But it's what it is now. I mean, Britain's soft power, our cultural creative industry is worth about, 125 billion, I think. Soft power all over the world. So it's different. I think one of the great things about British culture is it evolves. So
yeah, but what is it? What, to you, if you had to put it, if you had to bottle it, distill it, you know, a starting point, I know it's a big question, but there must be something, you know, whether it's, you know, our ability to tut at something that we dislike, whether it's an ability to, you know, have one pint too many when you go to the pub, whether it's the fact that we really do have an absolute desire and love of crisps. I don't know what it is, but there are a whole range of cultural things which I think are important. So for you, what is British culture?
I think British culture, in terms of how we're perceived, and I don't disagree with any of this, a cup of tea, queuing up, and our arts and culture scene, because I think that's what does define us. Our music, our arts, everything like that. That, for me, is the essence of British culture.
Oh, a good cup of tea. There we go. Vincent Moss, former political editor of the Sunday Mirror. Thank you very much indeed. I'm disappointed that you didn't mention our newspapers, but maybe that's something because it's bygone age. But there we go. Vincent, thank you. OK, over to your calls. I said that I would open the phone lines, and indeed open them I have. How do you define British culture and what threatens it? Michael's in Birmingham. Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon. This might not be what you're expecting, but I keep hearing the British people, we're supposed to be tolerant, and my view on it is it's cowardice.
Oh.
Tolerance is cowardice hiding behind virtue signalling, because frankly, and I include myself in it, if we'd been a country with any backbone, we'd have been on the streets long before summer. And the threat to this country, it's beaten this country. Wokery has beaten it.
OK, so wokery is the threat, but if you had to define British culture as it stands, or maybe what you want to defend, what is it?
Fight back, backs to the wall.
Yeah, well, I don't think that defines British culture, because that perhaps defines how you see it today. But what I'm saying is, what is the British culture that you would like to either defend or to bring back?
A culture where we genuinely looked after our own people.
OK.
And fought for them as well.
Right, then there we go. Michael, you've started the conversation. Thank you. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. How do you define British culture? And what do you think threatens it? You can give me a call. It's 0344 499 1000. My name's James Max. This is Talk.
The fact of the matter is, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day, and we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
Yeah,
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Oh, hello. It's me, James Max. I'm with you until 7 o'clock here on Talk, with your Drive Time show this Christmas Eve. And I want to talk to you about culture, British culture. Can you define it for me? And can you tell me what threatens it? Now, I'm asking because there have been some discussions that children are losing touch with British culture. And if I think back to when I was growing up, the amount of cultural references that I have from my childhood, I think are quite important. And it's things like, yes, Doctor Who and Tomorrow's World, perhaps the more adult starter programmes. But then actually, if I go back further and things like Bagpuss. Oh, Bagpuss. Ivor the Engine. Yes, please, thank you. And then various programmes that have been ruined by the fact that certain individuals misbehave themselves to such an extent that we can no longer refer to Top of the Pops, or indeed somebody will do some fixing. Oh, dear, oh dear. I mean, you see, children are losing touch with British culture towards BBC Chief. Yes, BBC, because you largely messed it up. Mismanaging our culture. Putting people on who can't string a sentence together because you've decided that it's so important to have some kind of visual identity that reflects the nation as opposed to, no, this is how people should talk. String a sentence together would be nice. A qualification for going on the BBC, string a sentence together. That would be good. What else? I just had a little bit of exercise there. Can you tell me, though, how do you define British culture? And also, what do you think threatens it? Because I think wokery is a serious threat to it. Now, it doesn't mean that our culture shouldn't change. There are a lot of things that we did in the 70s, 60s before my time, 70s and 80s that have subsequently changed, and things are a lot more, shall we say, tolerant in certain regards. And that might be a good thing. Having said that, I do think there are some very important British icons that need to be kept. Things that we need to sort of guard and identify, whether it's special days in the calendar, whether it's special events, or also making sure that people have enough knowledge of sort of historical British culture and history that then they're able to make up their own minds as to what they like and what they don't. Anyway, as I said, Iron Lady will be with us a little bit later on, so we'll do that. However, something that is very British is making a big fuss over a Christmas lunch. Now, I personally don't think it's important to make a big fuss over Christmas lunch, but some people do, and you might need some tips, and there are some important points which I think we need to get. So, luckily, I've got a private chef who's joining me now, Oliver Healy, and he joins me now to give us perhaps a few last-minute tips. Oliver, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Yeah, really well. Thank you very much indeed. So, private chef, does this mean that people ring you up, Oliver, and then suddenly you come over to their homes and you take away all the stress and the strains and you just cook everything for them?
In a nutshell, yes. But I work for one family full-time, so I'm very used to what they like and what they need.
Oh, to have the joy of a chef is... I mean, yeah, I mean, I dare say you're not going to tell us too much about this family. I might delve a little deeper if I can. But let's talk a little bit about some of the things that people get wrong, because I really like cooking. I'm fortunate enough that my mum decided that all of her children needed to learn how to cook. So if you want to give me a roast turkey, roast potatoes, all that sort of stuff, I'm happy pretty much creating everything. But why is it that at Christmas time people seem to get into panic? Is it because it's for more people than they usually cook for, or is it just because psychologically it's a big deal?
I think it's probably a bit of both. You know, Christmas, everyone looks forward to getting together and making it the absolute most perfect meal of perhaps the year. And everyone likes to get involved, don't they? I mean, that's what I know.
Oh no, get out of my kitchen. Seriously, if I'm cooking, just leave me alone. I do not want to be hassled by people doing stuff unless directed so to do. Because they put stuff in the wrong place, they're opening all the drawers, they're leaving things open, they're moving my sauces and condiments around. It's just like, no, get out.
Yeah, I mean, you've done the work, you've done the research, you know exactly what needs to be where at what point, and then if someone comes in and ruins it, and you're in a state of flux, and if someone ruins that, a pan of gravy goes over, and the gravy's the integral part.
I know, gravy is an integral part. Now, William Hanson, the UK's leading etiquette expert, was talking about gravy, and he basically intimated and said, too thick, too cancel. Is he right? Should a turkey gravy be really quite watery and thin?
He's got a point. Like, a lot of people have beef gravy, and there's obviously a lot more collagen in beef, so the collagen is what keeps that gravy nice and thick. And obviously with the turkey, there is a little bit of collagen, a little bit of protein. So yeah, it can be a little thin. A lot of Americans will make a roux and put a bit of flour in to thicken it. You've got to be very careful putting flour, because the longer you cook it, the thicker it will get. So you think you've made the perfect gravy ahead of time, and then when it comes to it and you pour it on, it's a bit like PVA glue. So I would kind of stay clear.
OK, steer clear of that. Now, I actually think that... I know that some people think that the turkey is a centrepiece. My view is that if you cook it right and leave it to rest long enough, it should remain fine. It can remain hot. I mean, people make the mistake of just taking it out of the oven and then carving it straight away. No, take it out of the oven, stick it under some foil or whatever, leave it to sit for, you know, up to an hour, I would say, and it's absolutely fine and stay nice and juicy. The thing that people sometimes get wrong, potatoes... What is your perfect recipe for the perfect roast potato?
I mean, I do them various different ways. I mean, there almost is no perfect way. Everyone likes to do them differently. I would say day before, parboil them.
Oh,
Peel them, cut them into fours, parboil them for like 5 minutes in salted water. Some people say boil them until they're literally about to fall apart, but that's risky if you're not used to cooking.
No.
I would say
no.
5 minutes,
yes.
You're golden, and let them cool down on like a rack so they cool evenly. And then once they cool down, put them in the fridge overnight, leave them. And they do solidify a little bit. So even if you think you have overcooked them, they will start to solidify. And then the next morning, they're parboiled, they're ready to go. And then you just cook them as you usually would. Nice hot oven, 200 degrees is fine. Hot oil, you could use goose fat, you could use butter, vegetable oil, whatever you prefer. Beef fat, I really like to do.
Yeah, I do like a beef or a goose fat potato. So in terms of how long, and sometimes people forget that the more stuff you put in an oven, the slightly longer you need to adjust your cooking times. But if you put the potatoes in, one of the things is, of course, that if you cook them from hot, then they're still steaming, which is why they can not be so nice and they don't perhaps crisp up as much. And if you cook them from cold, I think this was a Angela Hartnett thing. She said, look, the secret to a great potato is, you know, let it cool, as you say, and then make sure the fat is really hot when they go in. But don't forget to turn them and baste them and all that sort of business. Is an hour the golden amount of time for a roast potato to cook?
Yeah, but obviously it depends what else is in your oven, because if you've got lots of vegetables in your oven, they're mainly water, so they're steaming, and then that's almost detracting what you want to do from the roast potato. Making sure the potatoes have got space between them. I've made that mistake in the past. If they're all clumped together, you're going to get nowhere. So make sure there's a nice even space around them. Turn them every 20 minutes. They could be done in 40 minutes, could be done in an hour. It depends on the quality of your oven.
Now, the other thing which I get really cross about is when people cook sprouts badly or complain about them. I think sprouts are amazing, but I think they do need a bit of zhuzhing. Are you a fan of a blanched sprout cut in half and then zhuzhed with, you know, whether it's cooked chestnuts and pine nuts and maybe a bit of alcoholic beverage and various other things? How do you do your sprouts?
So, do you know what? I'm actually a really massive fan of grilled vegetables. So I'll do exactly what you've said. I would cut them in half and just nick off the roots. Parboil them 3 minutes along with some shallots, just chopped shallots. Put that in a salted water 3 minutes and put them straight into ice water. So that will stop the cooking immediately, and you still retain the sort of bright green colour. Pat them dry, get them as dry as humanly possible. And then if anyone has a griddle pan, get the griddle pan really hot or on the barbecue.
Nice.
A little bit of oil and just put them on there. And because the sprouts are essentially cabbage, grilled cabbage and grilled onions, fantastic. It'll take a few minutes to get a bit of barbecue grill colour. And then I like to make essentially a salad dressing, but use American mustard. So I don't think people like sprouts because they're slightly bitter. And that American mustard's quite a sweet mustard. So olive oil, American mustard, lemon juice, or some sort of cider vinegar, lemon, white wine vinegar, whatever you have, salt, pepper, shake all over. And it just adds a bit of sweetness to the Christmas dinner.
Now, do you make your own Christmas puddings or do you buy them in?
We buy them in.
And if you want to get a good one, because there's always this discussion about where the really good ones come from and all that sort of business. And then there's a sort of, I mean, I do think that the Aldi supermarket ones, if you want a relatively cheap one, seem to do pretty well in those taste tests. Can you ever go wrong with an M&S or a Waitrose Christmas pudding? Probably not. And if you've got a bit of extra cash, go down to Fortnum's and hello. But in terms of cooking them, I mean, I'm assuming that the whole cooking of a Christmas pudding, it's been made so much easier with the advent of the microwave. Oh, sorry, the microwave.
Who are they, please? Do you know what? As soon as about 10 minutes before we start to eat, you just steam it. You get a pan of water, put it in the pan and cover it, and it just steams. As you're eating your roast, your Christmas dinner, steams away for about an hour and a half, I think it usually is. And then nice bit of brandy butter.
I do like a brandy butter. Yeah, or cream, or both. Just finally to you, in terms of drinks, I mean, champagne or fizz, perhaps to start. What, you know, with the main event, are you white, rosé, red, or is it just whatever's available and just serve the lot?
I mean, whatever my boss is prepared to serve me, to be honest with you. No, I think you do have like champagne as I'm sort of preparing the meal, and we'll probably open some nice red, I'd say. A nice sort of burgundy with white meat, as you say.
How delicious. Just before I let you go, anything that we should know or do that perhaps we can take some advice from clearly I don't know, a private chef with a fabulous family and a Christmas ahead. Any top tips as we all prepare?
Yeah, if you haven't done it, you can still learn before tomorrow. Debone that turkey. You are going to dramatically decrease the cooking time, I would say by 75%.
Wow.
It's just like deboning a chicken. If you go on YouTube, type my name in, you'll see a chicken tutorial. It's so easy, and it'd be the best piece of advice I could give you for multiple cooking occasions.
I have never. Yeah, no, I've never heard of deboning the turkey before. Blimey, that could be a massive.
Have absolute control over what you're doing. And invest in a temperature probe if you don't already have one, or make still borrow to get one for tomorrow.
Yeah, you've got at least an hour or two to go and buy one. Oliver, we must leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. Oliver Healy is a private chef. God, I'd like to know who that family is, who has him. Look, no, they're looking at me blankly through the glass. We're not going to find out. Meanwhile, I'm asking you about how do you define British culture and what threatens it. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. Lenny is in Ashford. Lenny, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, James.
Well, Lenny, I mean, you know, who better to advise me on British culture and cultural values and indeed the threats than you?
Well, thank you very much for the comment, for the compliment, James. Thank you. Well, I think culture comes under the same thing as characteristics, and that is that every nation has its own characteristics and culture.
Very true. So how do you, if you had to, like, distill or tell somebody who's not British what those characteristics or those elements are, what are they? I mean, are they things like we really like going to the pub for a pint and a packet of crisps? Is it that we have a strange obsession with eating too many chocolates on Christmas Day? Or is it that we like going for a curry on a Friday night? I don't know. What is it?
Well, I always talk to you about my experiences of life. And many years ago, I was abroad and I wanted to buy something and I did not have enough money on me. And the shopkeeper said, "Have you got a checkbook with you?" And I said, "Yes, I have." He said, "Well, just give me a check." And I said, "But you don't know me." He said, "I will always take an English person's check."
Oh.
And that was.
Do you think that element of trust is still there around the world, Lenny, or do you think it's gone?
No, it's all gone.
Oh,
it's all gone.
It's all gone. Well, hang on a sec there, Lenny, because I might come back and get another couple of comments from you in just a moment. However, if you want to join this conversation, I'd like to hear from you. How do you define British culture, and what do you think threatens it? You can give me a call. It's 0344 499 1000. That's the telephone number. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On the app. On your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It's me, James Max, until 7 o'clock here on Talk. How do you define British culture and what threatens it, is what I'm asking. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. And I was chatting with Lenny, who's in Ashford. Lenny?
Yes, James?
So I'm just trying to sort of dig down a bit to see if we can come up with a couple of things that... maybe we'd like to make sure that they're either preserved or otherwise. I mean, if I'm thinking of sort of Britishness or British culture, I think some of it is defined by our small villages and sort of chocolate box little houses and all that sort of stuff. And we seem to be allowing our politicians to do everything they possibly can to ruin them.
Yes, well, I mean, I truly believe that our politicians and our peers set a bad example.
That's true. I mean, do you think that historically you would have expected British cultural icons to leave a good legacy, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, I'm in my twilight years, as you know, and
oh, Lenny, I thought you were sprightly and in your 20s.
I wished I was. I was on Friday night when I was dancing, James. You would have been surprised.
I think that would have surprised everybody who's listening, Lenny, but there we go.
Yeah, but what it is...
Were you doing backflips again?
Pardon?
Were you doing backflips again? No.
No, it's just straightforward rock and roll, James.
Well, fair enough. OK, well, if there was one thing that we could or should do to perhaps remove the threat, what would it be?
That's a difficult question. Well, I mean, our peers have got to start setting an example for the rest of us to follow. I mean, at the moment, we are now living in a country where you can't believe anybody what they say.
Well, that's very, very true, Lenny. And maybe, just basic morals and moral compass is what needs to return. Thank you for call. Wishing you a very Merry Christmas. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number if you want to get involved in the conversation. I want to hear from you. How do you define British culture? And what threatens it? Children are losing touch with British culture, according to a BBC chief. And I think that the BBC is partly responsible. And I do think that language and the language that we have, but also how we use it, how we deploy it, how we say it. And it's not necessarily about accents per se, but it is about how it's deployed. And at least if you're going to break the rules, at least know why you're breaking them. And then it allows you to break them with authority and meaning. So, for example, when I say that I've got a Iron Lady in the studio, I'm doing it with good knowledge that, of course, it should be an Iron Lady. But no, it's an AI Iron Lady. So it's a Iron Lady. And, I did say that we would turn to Margaret and say, well, what would Margaret say? And what would Margaret do? Oh, through the wonders of AI, she lives amongst us. What have you got for us, Margaret?
Under my leadership, our borders would be secure. Uncontrolled immigration a thing of the past. Our defence forces the finest and most capable in the world. And we'd be at the forefront of technological advancement. And you'd still be able to get 2 pints and a packet of cheese and onion crisps for under a £5.
Oh, yes, Margaret. See? Margaret for Prime Minister, that's what I say. What would Margaret say? What would Margaret do? Maybe that's what we need to do to define our British culture and what threatens it. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number to join that conversation. Meanwhile, let's turn our attention to something else. Reform UK hopes to surge past the Tories, sorry, Margaret, in membership numbers. With it, I actually think, though, Margaret would probably be a member of Reform, wouldn't she? Anyway, within a month after publishing figures, they show that they're only 11,000 members short. So what does that mean for UK politics? Howard Cox is founder of Fair Fuel UK, and he's also a former Reform candidate for London Mayor. Or was it the London Nightmare under Sadiq Khan? I don't know. Howard, good afternoon.
Hello, James. Long time no speak. Good to see you, mate.
Well, it's nice to be back here on the airwaves and the visual waves. I mean, look... you know, you're a sort of political beast, as it were. You've been involved in politics for many times. I'm assuming if Margaret Thatcher was still in charge, we wouldn't have half of the problems that we've got today, would we?
Well, you're absolutely right. I'm a devout Thatcherite. That's what I was. I mean, what's happened is, you know, we wouldn't have a Reform Party if it wasn't for the fact that the Tories have moved away from the actual area which they were controlling, which is the majority of the country. You know, either middle road, slightly centre-right maybe, but, you know, if they hadn't been so incompetent and clueless, and, you know, they're very arrogant now Labour's in, and we knew what Labour would do. I didn't think it'd be as bad as this, though, James, but having said that, these uni parties, the two parties themselves, people are fed up to the back teeth, and it's hurting them in their pocket, it's hurting them in their lives. All sorts of things are happening at the moment with people, particularly things like policing, immigration. We can go on forever, but fundamentally, reform wouldn't exist if it wasn't for those two parties being so incompetent.
So maybe we should rename or ask Nigel to take a new surname and call him Nigel Thatcher, you know, because maybe that you know, that's what's required. But when it comes to looking at this membership, how important is it to have that grassroots membership? Does it really matter whether the Conservatives or Reform have more party members?
Well, I think it's symbolic in many respects, James. The fact is that we're the third party at the moment, not necessarily in seats, because obviously Lib Dems are, but we've got much more membership than those sorts of parties. We're going to overtake the Tories, and you can see that Labour's membership is plummeting. It's now down to about 250,000, I understand, somewhere around that level. The point is, and that would be the nice one to catch up onto, but it is important because that is the flavour, that's the temperature out there. I'm meeting people on a regular basis. I also stood at Dover and Deal in the last election, and I came second. I knocked the Tories into third place. Sunak gave us 3-4 weeks to actually campaign, whereas the Labour candidate down in Dover Deal that beat me, he had 2.5 years campaigning. So I had 3.5 weeks.
So let's talk a little bit perhaps about British culture and maybe what threatens it, because I assume that one of the reasons that Reform, setting aside whether it's incompetence or otherwise of our main political parties, and every so often we see sort of political upheaval as parties respond to the environment in which they find. That's why we ended up with the Lib Dems, spawned from the SDP and various others. In terms of reform, is reform driven by an ideology, or is it driven actually by an identification that British culture is under attack and therefore a political party needs to define it and preserve it?
Well, I'm a pretty pragmatic and practical sort of character, and it took a lot for when Richard Tice asked me. Actually, it was on talkTV. We went for a coffee afterwards when I used to appear on his Sunday spot. And we went for a coffee, and he said, how would you like to stand for London Mayor? And I said, no way, until I discussed with them their policies. And it took me 3 months to say yes. And yes, it was impossible. There was no chance of winning. But the important thing was establish a bit of a basis for actually to springboard further forward. We did get one guy, actually, Alex Wilson, who's now on the Assembly. But answering your question, from the point of view of the culture, I don't think that really enters into it. We're all proud British people, and whether it's arts, ingenuity, tolerance, generosity of spirit, sense of humour, all those sorts of things, we stand for. The important thing is it's what's happening to people basically at grassroots.
I mean, I guess if you've got the Labour government as they're currently in, you've got to have a sense of humour, haven't you?
Well, absolutely right. I mean, I can't believe what's happening. I have to say that I've got to thank the Labour government because we actually got another freeze in fuel duty. I've been doing that for 15 years, and I never expected them to actually, I did lots of campaigning work with a lot of the Tory backbenchers and also, obviously, the famous five of Reform to convince them, and I'm delighted. But then it was all tempered. I'm sorry. It was, I got really saddened by the fact what they were doing with the inheritance tax. And one Labour MP said to me 3 or 4 days after the budget, Howard, you've done a great job on fuel duty again, but it was either you or the farmers. There's an irony.
There is an irony. Howard, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk. It's much appreciated. That's Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK, but also former Reform candidate for the London Mayor. Talking about Reform's UK membership set to be higher than the Tories within a month. We may return to that a little bit later on. But also, I want to return to our conversations about British culture. How do you define it? and what do you think threatens it? And I'm sure that later on in the programme we'll have more from a Iron Lady as well. She's got some more common sense for you. After all, this is the home of common sense. And I will promise that I will come to some of your texts and emails. Did I read the text number? No, I didn't. 87222. Start your text with the word talk, and you can send me a message on X at talkTV or at the James Max. Plus, more of your calls are next on Talk.
The fact of the matter is, you've got to, obviously, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day? And we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say, deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
Yeah,
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
So, it's 4:53, it's me, James Max. I am with you until 7 o'clock this evening with your Drive Time show this Christmas Eve on Talk. How do you define British culture and what threatens it is what I'm asking. 0344 499 1000. Well, surely one of the things that defines us is our strange obsession with travel and transport and queuing and cancellations and leaves on the line. Now, yesterday he was at Waterloo. Today he's at one of my favourite stations, Paddington. If only because it's the name of the station, and that's the name of my favourite bear. Simon Calder is travel correspondent for The Independent, joins me now. Simon, good afternoon.
James, great to see you. And look, here I am at London Paddington. The reason I've come here is partly because, of course, your predilection for the marvellous fictional character last seen in Peru, but actually mostly because this is the second busiest station in the UK. It's the hub for going to the west of England and to South Wales. And if you don't get yourself down here pretty sharpish after your show, you're not going to be going anywhere from here until the 30th of December.
Oh.
So, for instance, if you are heading from Bristol, last train tonight, 8:30. Miss that, and there's nothing for best part of a week. That's because they'll be doing lots of engineering works outside here. It's nothing to do with actually the Great Western Railway. It's entirely to do with HS2, that very popular high-speed link between London and Birmingham. Same picture is replicated across town at London-Liverpool Street, which is also going to be shutting down tonight, and that's not going to be opening until the 2nd of January. So if you are planning to travel by train today, please plan in advance, make sure you get your last train, and bear in mind, well, I did tell you yesterday there were no trains running on Christmas Day. After that, a talk viewer got in touch and said, there are actually, why don't you check? So I did, James, and you can go anywhere you want to tomorrow by train, as long as it's from Heathrow Airport Terminal 2 and 3 to Heathrow Airport Terminal 4 or 5. It's that little rail shuttle that goes back and forth under the airport. That's the only train that's running. Bit of good news for you, it's free.
Excellent. Just very quickly, Simon, if one wants to travel on the roads, either today or maybe tomorrow, I'm assuming caution always, but anything particular we should know, or is it all beginning to calm down a bit?
We've had a pretty horrible day in some parts. For instance, the M40 was temporarily closed, overturned lorry, I'm sorry to say. Things very much clearing now. You can drive happily from now pretty much until Boxing Day, and I calculate 10 o'clock in the morning on Boxing Day is where we're going to get the next big jams building up. Might well have to do with something with people going shopping in the sales after Christmas. Stay in with Talk is my advice to you at all times.
Well, then there we go. Better advice we could not receive. Simon Calder, thank you so much indeed for joining us this afternoon here on Talk. Simon is, of course, travel correspondent for The Independent, and what he doesn't know about travel, well, it's not worth knowing. So there we go. You have been warned about using those roads and rails. Meanwhile, American Airlines just reporting that those flights that had all been cancelled because of a technical failure, well, they're back on board. So that's all good news. There we are. Thank you for that. Meanwhile, back to our conversation about how do you define British culture and what threatens it. Adele is in London. Hello, it's me.
Oh, hi, lovely to talk to you. My Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone on the talk zone. I absolutely love them.
Well, I was wondering after all these years you'd like to meet and go over everything, Adele.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I'm 82 and I've been a long time listener and viewer.
Now, they say that time's supposed to heal you, but I ain't done much healing. So let's move away from the lyrics of Adele's great song, Hello, to how do you define British culture, Adele?
Well, first of all, free speech.
Yes.
Tolerance of other religions.
Yes.
Good manners.
Right.
Labourliness. And mostly, from foreign friends that I have, is belief in the police, which is gone.
Oh, well, that's gone. So, apparently children are losing touch with British culture. What could be done about that?
Perhaps the school could start bringing them into it again. Teaching proper... I don't know, because in my particular area, we've had things changed to other countries' names and things like that, so we haven't even got our own original names for things in Brixton and Clapham.
Oh dear. So, from your perspective, I mean, we haven't mentioned the immigration word, but I'm assuming that that's part of it.
Oh, yes, obviously it needs to be controlled. We've always welcomed people into this country. You know, in the Windrush, we had families living with us. So that is not a problem. The problem is the Jewish people have come here, other religions have come here, and they haven't tried to change us.
And I suppose the issue is about integration, isn't it? And if that integration doesn't happen, then it causes issues. Adele, thank you very much indeed for your call. Merry Christmas to you, and thank you for taking the time to pick up the phone, because we will continue that conversation. 03444991000 is the telephone number to define British culture and what threatens it. Plus, I'm going to be joined by Charlie Rowley to go through the big stories, and a Iron Lady, she'll be back on Talk.
on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
2 minutes past 5 o'clock is the time. This is Drive with me, James Max, here on Talk. I'm with you till 7 o'clock this Christmas Eve. Still to come. We've got plenty, by the way. We're going to be hearing more from A Iron Lady as we continue to find out what would Margaret do. And also we'll be taking more of your calls on how do you define British culture and what threatens it. 0344 499 1000 on that. Plus, we're going to be talking about our defence services and whether they're really up for it. We'll be speaking to MP Mark Francois, Shadow Defence Minister, about that. We'll also be finding if there are any last-minute gifts that you can deal with, because there must be somebody that you've forgotten, or a card that you've forgotten, or something else. And indeed, we'll be finding out why James Bond will not be coming back to the big screen any time soon. As I said, we'll be taking more of your calls on how you define British culture and what threatens it. 0344 499 1000. Plus, we'll be going through the big Conservative party stories and indeed rise of reform and all the other politics with Charlie Rowley. He's a former Conservative special advisor. That's all coming up on your drive time on Talk. So very good. I think it's evening. I mean, it's kind of got dark, but then it got dark before I even went on air. Oy. I mean, it is Christmas Eve, and I suppose chestnuts are roasting, the fire is burning, and maybe you're thinking about tomorrow where you've got to schlep to all your family relatives and all that stuff. Or maybe you're just panicking in the kitchen as you're doing a bit of pre-prep. I don't know, whatever you're doing, you can give me a call if you like. It's 0344 499 1000. Tell me how you define British culture. And also, tell me what threatens it. Because I think it is the small things that make for British culture. Yes, it's the language. Yes, it's the plays and the history. Yes, it's our newspapers. And it's our media. And it's our television. And our film. And our actors. And our musicians. But it's also the things that we say and do. It's the fact that we live on an island and we kind of tut at things and standing on the right, going down and mind the gap, if you're at Waterloo. And those sorts of things, which I think are very important. But then also, I do think that our language and the accents that we have are an important part of British culture. I'm not going to start impersonating accents up and down the country. I don't have an accent, by the way, but other people do. Yes, they do. Meanwhile, we'll just come to some of your comments. Leo has given me he says, Cultural History of England. I actually have that book. He said, anybody who wants to look into the subject in detail should read the book. It's centred on England, but given the nucleus of British culture, it's a great read. Start here. And also, read George Orwell's essay, The Lion and the Unicorn. I think he's got a point. I have read that essay, and it is a great sort of compotting, if you like. James, it's all the things, it's hundreds of small and large things that make our culture. Mass immigration and the woke virus are doing their best to destroy it, says Alex in Norfolk. I was in Norfolk last weekend. What a lovely place. Oh, glorious. The beaches. I mean, I prefer an Essex beach, frankly, because those Norfolk beaches, they can go along for a very long time. I mean, if that tide goes out, you've got a schlep to get to the sea, but they are beautiful. Anyway, this one says, from John, he says, I'm a 21-year-old British man born in the north of England. Last week, for the first time in my adulthood, I signed up to a political party. It was Reform UK. I believe Nigel Farage is the only man who can lead the UK forward to becoming a strong nation again and to be able to compete in global markets. Nigel has said in an interview that he can deliver free trade deals with America. Leading on to Musk, he and Donald Trump's view of Britain, rightly so, as motherland. Trump being the most UK-lean president for some time. Musk donating to put in the power men can make a simple and effective, OK, yes, profitable, but prosperous for all involved. Nigel Farage will be our Prime Minister. It's just a question of when. So that's from John. Let's speak to Charlie Rowley. He's a former Conservative special advisor. Charlie, good evening to you. What do you make of John's view that Nigel Farage is the only man who can lead the UK forward and will be our next Prime Minister?
Well, good evening. I mean, as a Conservative commentator, someone that worked for the Conservative government in the past and has seen the total obliteration at the last election, it seems to me, anything is possible.
So
I think it's
that obliteration, why do you think that was? Is it because people didn't like what they were saying going forward? They didn't trust the people who were there saying it? Or the last 14 years, the track record was pretty torrid?
Trust. It's all about the trust that was broken with the British people. You know, a government that's had a lot of time to say that it's going to do things and then not follow that through, coupled with the chopping and changing of the internal politics of the Conservative Party, putting themselves in terms of who they want to be leader and what faction here. You know, at one stage, I think there are about 5 different sort of, you know, families of the Conservative Party, whether it was the ERG, you know, the European skeptics versus the One Nations versus the, goodness knows what the other groups that popped up. Their names escape me. They didn't last very long.
But then
all of those...
Liz Truss didn't last very long when she so-called crashed the economy. Keir Starmer seems to be doing a train wreck of the economy, and he seems to still be in power. I mean, why is it that Labour seem not to be able to deal with their problematic leaders, whereas the Tories seem to, you know, nuke them before they can even get started?
Well, part of that is trust, as we talked about. So, you know, during the general election, Labour said they weren't going to put up national insurance contributions. Then they have. So that trust has been broken. And when you lose that trust with the electorate, you also break that confidence in the markets and with business. So that's one aspect of it. But it's also about, just as you talked about Liz Truss there, communications. Now, Liz might have had all of the right ideas to cut taxes, to grow the economy, to stimulate growth, to turbocharge and put those rocket boosters up businesses to make us, you know, the world leader in terms of growth or whatever it is she wanted to do. But she couldn't communicate it. You know, she did press conferences that lasted, I think, about sort of 10 minutes and walked off and then cried in the corridor. You know, so she wasn't convicted. She didn't carry the convictions of what she wanted to do. She couldn't communicate the policies to bring people with her.
But you see, that's the point. You see, I'm not sure necessarily that she had the policies. And this is when, you know, you've got Kemi Badenoch who's saying, well, you know, we can't turn around the ship in a day and blah, blah, blah. To my mind, good leadership is when you have some good ideas. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put all your policies up for dissection by the opposing party or let them nick them or whatever it is. But if Kemi Badenoch was very clear about tax, if she was very clear about education, if she was very clear about defence of the realm and providing very clear narrative and policies for it, she might be slightly more popular. At the moment, she seems to be playing in a debating society at some convoluted university, debating society, which is not resonating with the public. I just don't see her as a force for leadership or indeed power. If she continues in the way she's doing so, not only will Reform overtake the Tories in terms of their membership, Reform will overtake the Tories and the Tories will be a goodbye and spend force. They haven't got a chance.
Well, I think on the first, I think, you know, Reform will overtake the Tories in terms of its membership. They seem to have momentum. I wouldn't be surprised if their numbers already there and they're trailing out the increases just to have that sort of momentum with them. But that's, you know, call me a sceptic. But I think what the difference between now and 5 years ago, when, you know, Sir Keir Starmer became leader of the opposition, he only had to sit and wait for the Tories to self-implode, as they obviously ended up doing. Kemi can't just sit there and wait for Sir Keir Starmer, who has trashed the economy and where things are not going well for him. She can't sit and wait for the voters to then suddenly come back to the Tories because of Reform and the momentum and the
so do you think that until or unless she sets out her stall, we could be seeing a Conservative Party that is withering on the vine?
Well, I think two things. I think you can wait to have the right policies in place that are fit for the nation and what the nation demands. So there is no one quick fix, I think, when it comes to now that this government has scrapped the Rwanda policy. There is no one quick fix in terms of immigration, which is, I think, arguably the number one issue, probably second to the economy and tax cuts that, you know, people in this country care about. So there's no problem trying to fix things and having time to develop those policies. But to your point and what I think you're absolutely right in saying, you've got to provide commentary and a narrative to things that are happening on a day-to-day basis. You can't just sit in the back room and sort of think of the policies for them to be announced and everybody to say, oh yes, what a great idea, and, you know, they're fabulous. You've got to be front and centre day after day, whether it's about literature in schools, whether it's about the farmers' tax, and all of those two things, or crime that you seem to be seeing on our streets. In all of those areas, Nigel Farage always seems to be first out of the traps, acting as the leader of the opposition, when that should be Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives.
Well, it sounds like you want to join him. Now, Charlie, all this All this programme, I have been talking about the idea of a brand new feature. Well, basically, initially it started as What Would Margaret Say, because she might have a view on British politics. And then we decided to create a Iron Lady. So I just wonder what Margaret would say about another aspect of policy. Margaret, over to you.
Fiasco after fiasco. If I was still Prime Minister, we'd not be in this mess. Tax would be lower, trade and investment higher, and you'd have more money in your pocket. Why is this country governed by cretins?
Well, I think that's a very good point, Margaret. Charlie, what do you make of a Iron Lady and her views there?
Well, I think she's absolutely right. I can't say any more than that, James. That's quite a surreal experience.
You're impressed, aren't you, with our brand new feature here? No expense spared at Talk, I'll tell you. Home of common sense, that's why. Let's talk about some of the other stories which are perhaps in the news. I mean, the Royal Mail, it seems to be a mess. The last lot sort of, I don't know, set it up for failure, and this lot have just allowed it to be taken over. So Royal Mail, now in foreign ownership. Does it matter?
Oh, I think it does matter. And I think this goes back to actually your key question about what is British culture. And I think it's still having a stake in our institutions, you know. So I think when you have foreign direct investment that's taking over those institutions, the Royal Mail, for example, or whether it's football clubs, you know, great British tradition, you know, it's the nation's sport, things like that erode, I think, what we as a society that binds us, I think is part of the problem. But this issue at Christmas time about Royal Mail deliverers claiming that there wasn't anybody in, or they weren't able to access the properties to deliver the goods at Christmas time in order to ensure that they achieve their bonuses or their top-up pay, I think is incredibly callous.
It is rather, and one has to examine how on earth they're being managed. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer apparently is heading abroad for New Year's Day. Does it matter if our politicians... I mean, you can't expect them to be in the country 24/7. They need to go on holiday sometimes, don't they?
They do, but the accusation label at Keir Starmer is that he might not have been in this country enough. So I don't know where he's having a holiday. I mean, a holiday, you know, being in the UK would be seen as a holiday, the way that he's been away so often, I imagine. But look, anybody, whether it's senior leadership in business, in politics, in sports, in anyone, deserves a holiday. After a stressful period. He's had a long election campaign. He's had a long time in waiting as leader of the opposition, where he probably hasn't been away all that much, or we didn't know about him being away all that much. And obviously they've, you know, headlines of their own making, which has caused probably a lot of stress and anxiety within Number 10 and for the Prime Minister, not getting the honeymoon period that I think he was hoping for. I think he's probably now entitled to a holiday, hopefully to reflect.
Well, I'd be very happy for him to go abroad and stay there. Meanwhile, let's talk about defining British culture and what threatens it. For you, what are the... I mean, it's small things, it's large things, but to you, what do you think defines British culture?
Well, you're right, and you rattled off a number of things at the top of this segment. So from the arts to history to education to ownership of our institutions. I think the two things for me, it's about fairness and tolerance. That underpins, I think, British culture. So we are very tolerant, we are very fair. You know, you are innocent until proven guilty in this country. You know, the UK legal system was exported right across the world. Our politics, our political system.
But then, you see, isn't it interesting that years ago, people probably would have said, and I'm really surprised that we haven't talked about, you know, the smaller things like cups of tea and biscuits, but also bigger things such as, for example, the royal family, that it would appear as if the royal family is no longer... Nobody has sent me a message saying it's the royal family, it's those traditions, it's, you know, it's there. I don't think people are particularly against it, but I do think that part of British culture is the royal family. And the fact that, you know, years ago, pretty much the whole nation would have stopped to listen to the King's message and speech tomorrow afternoon. I dare say a lot of people, although I'm sure we'll be carrying it here on this station, a lot of people will be just being like, yeah, whatever, and we'll be getting along with their day and eating turkey and Quality Street. All celebrations.
Well, I think that's right, or any other chocolates that might be available, in which I do like to peruse the chocolates that are...
I bet you do, but you see, I don't know. Are you Celebrations, Heroes, or Quality Street, or are you a little bit more upmarket than that?
No, Christmas. I do like the Quality Street, or anything that's got creams. I like a strawberry or an orange cream.
Oh dear. I found a bag in Aldi just right for you, which I bought for my other half because I have terrible problems. I mean, I suppose we're the perfect fit in terms of Quality Street because I like the purple ones and the toffee ones, and they like the strawberry creams and the orange creams, which I find, you know, they put them in the bin.
Yes, well, I'll happily take them. But you're right. The royal family, I think, patriotism in this country, which I think has been eroded, is part of our British. You know, we should be proud of our country. We should be a proud nation.
But we're still not very good. You know, if somebody puts the Union flag in their garden, people think that they're, you know, either, you know, suspect, racist, or otherwise. It's just like, when are we going to be able to display our flag without people coming up with these views that it's not something to be proud of?
Exactly. And I have no idea how this has infiltrated and infected our politics and society. It's nothing to do with immigration. I mean, take the US. You know, it is a country built on immigration and migrants, but yet the whole melting pot of the US centres around that flag.
Oh, they love the stars and stripes. And spangle it everywhere. Right, well, there we are, Charlie. We are out of time, but thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk. It's much appreciated. Have a wonderful Christmas and enjoy eating those strawberry creams and orange creams, if you like, from that Quality Street box. Watch out, Charlie's after them for you. Right, Charlie Rowley, former Conservative Special Advisor, giving us his thoughts. I want you to give me yours, please. How do you define British culture and what threatens it? 0344 499 1000, and I promise I'll come to some more of your texts and messages. That's coming up next on Talk.
The fact of the matter is, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day? And we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, you know, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say, deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
Yeah,
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is
22 minutes past 5 o'clock. It's me, James Max, with you till 7 o'clock here on Talk, where I'm talking to you about how you define British culture and what threatens it. Plenty of comments coming in on the old socials, so I'll just pick up some of those spectacles on. Good afternoon, James. Merry Christmas to you and yours. On the topic of British culture and what it means to me, I suppose I would have to remember back to being a kid, since the world doesn't seem to be the same anymore. British culture is being able to extract the Michael, shall we say, out of one another and laugh about it. It's about having a family barbecue in the rain. It's about hoping we win a major football tournament and then feeling the sadness of when we just can't get over the line. Spitting Image, The Two Ronnies, Captain Pugwash, Sooty and Co, Art Attack, Blue Peter. Nostalgia is all we have now. I'm afraid our identity is slowly being lost to the whinging lefties, says Damien. And I think that sort of popular culture of particularly television, when children are losing touch with British culture, warns BBC chief. Yes, it's because the BBC isn't putting on children's television at the times in the schedule when they could or should be watching it collectively as families. I mean, Saturday morning TV, that's gone, because apparently children shouldn't be sitting on their rear ends watching telly, and that's been replaced by Saturday Kitchen. I mean, why do we have to have wall-to-wall cooking programmes where they cook omelettes in 11 seconds? Nobody cares! Where is Noel Edmonds when you need him? Swap Shop. I love Swap Shop. And then, you know, the chaos of Tiswas. What threatens me? Even Wonky Donkey, frankly, with Ant and Dec. What threatens British culture is immigration, says this one. This is from Max in Warwickshire. The Tories and overpopulation. What defines British culture is industry, car making, sport, pride in the country, and the royals. Oh, you mentioned the royals, thank heavens for that. We'll just take one more. James, there are so many cultural norms that are British it's difficult to explain. Fairness and freedom of speech, trust in the law of the land, supporting the downtrodden, generosity, helping your neighbour, support of the military, fighting terror, protecting one's family. A love of drama and expertise in the theatre, literature, belief in democracy and upholding the law of our land, roast dinners, fish and chips, puddings, the pub, cricket and rugby, the countryside and talking about the weather. The list is huge, says Sue. It certainly is, Sue. Now, if you've been listening to that and you've got some input on what you believe defines British culture and what you think threatens it, call me now. It's 0344 499 1000. I will come back to some of your calls in a few moments' time. So if you want to call me now, you'll get through and then we'll get you on air. Meanwhile, it seems to be a British trait, and I don't know whether it's a trait around the world, but people seem to leave Christmas until the last minute. So what happens if you've left something till the last minute? Is there anything you can do? Well, let's speak to Holly Mead, who is Deputy Money Editor of The Times. Joins me now. Holly, good evening to you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. What a fantastic new name you have for this time of year. Obviously, a joke that no one's ever made before. Meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about people who have left it. Why is it that 9% of the population or something leave all their Christmas shopping till Christmas Eve and presumably... you know, have got one or two things and they just haven't done anything even now, and they'll realise that there's somebody that they've forgotten. What do you do? What's your advice?
Oh, it's the same reason that we leave our work and our homework deadlines till the last moment, isn't it? It's that adrenaline rush. We love the jeopardy of it. Maybe that's a part of being British, like you say. For anyone that is heading out tonight, sending all good thoughts. I think the couple of things. Make an action plan before you head out. List of people's names, maybe a couple of keywords by each one. Maybe you know Uncle Jim really likes beer and he's a size medium. You know Auntie Margaret loves a sherry but doesn't like a brandy. Make a couple of bits of notes so you've got things straight in your head, because I think in the panic and the chaos of the shops tonight, it's easy to just go in and melt down.
I understand that, but there must be, I mean, for an adult, I mean, if they're of a certain age, obviously, you know, I mean, children, frankly, money, you know, can always be a winner. You know, you might spend time. Is it better to do something like simple, for example, I was chatting to Christo earlier and he said, well, look, if it's really that much of a disaster, you can always go on to your computer, you can download a voucher, or you can do something which you can just print it off, stick it in a nice card or whatever it may be, or a bottle of fizz or some chocolate or, you know, money in an envelope or something like that, which is far better than just going, you know, spending your money on something that you just stick in the bin the next day.
Yes, the thing I would say to anyone who's doing last-minute shopping online, even if it is just a voucher, is do watch out for scams, because fraud is just absolutely rife at this time of year. Fraud sites and scammers know how to capitalise on your Christmas panic. So check the URL, check it looks genuine, check the logo is correct. Anything that looks a bit off, just come away from that browser, open up a new window. If the deal sounds too good to be true, I'm sorry to tell you, but it probably is. If in doubt, do a homemade voucher. Make a homemade voucher that says, I'm going to take you out for a lovely meal in the new year. Put it in a card. It's the thought that counts. It's Christmas and it's about being together.
I think it certainly is, and I suppose there are, different things that we can or should do. Just looking ahead, though, one of the things that happens pretty much at midnight tonight is the sales start. So, I mean, are we going to see any bargains? Because a lot of people have told me that the great British public up and down the country have all been tightening our belts somewhat. We haven't spent quite as much. I've noticed it even with, deals on alcohol, particularly from supermarkets, were absolutely rampant on the way into Christmas, and it would appear as if they've still got overstock of that and chocolates and God knows what else. So the deals from Christmas Day, Boxing Day could be magnificent. Or am I just thinking wishfully?
You just need to do your research, because it's the same as with Black Friday. Actually, if you track the prices, what stores do, and this particularly happens online, is they'll increase the price artificially for a couple of weeks before the big date, so then it looks like a big sale when you come to it. So you can there are price tracking tools that you can use online that will tell you how much something has been.
Which are the best price trackers?
If you just Google, there's a bunch of them, and you can actually even run them as an add-on in your browser, so you're always kept alert. Or you can set up a Google alert on an item that you like, so when it goes in the sale, you are alerted to that. With any sale item, if you weren't going to buy it in the first place, it's not a bargain. So it's only a bargain if you wanted or needed that item anyway.
That's a very good thought and some very good advice. And just finally, are there any trends that we should be aware of? I mean, for example, I'm still trying to get hold of a Ninja slushie. There aren't any to be found anywhere, so I'm afraid it's just going to have to wait because they've gone down a storm like the US. Ninja seem to make these extraordinary products. Other kitchen products and air fryers are available. But is there something which is just like the must-have?
Yeah, the air fryer that was a big thing, I'd say, like 2022. This year, there aren't nothing that's really caught my eye. Again, like you say, you're probably a bit too late for it. I'd say wait for January when the restock comes in, and you'll probably get the newest model anyway, and it'll be a better deal.
Then there we go. That's great advice. Thank you very much indeed, Holly Mead, Deputy Money Editor of The Times. Thank you for joining us here on Talk, where next we'll be talking about the military with Mark Francois, the MP, Shadow Defence Minister, and also getting some more of your calls on how you define British culture and what you think threatens it. The telephone number is 0344 499 1000. That's all coming up on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a very good evening to you. It's me, James Max, with you until 7 o'clock with your drive time show here on Talk. Hope you're well and hope you're preparing your way into Christmas on this Christmas Eve. So, all sorts of things still to do. We'll be defining British culture and what you think threatens it. Taking more of your calls on that. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number to get involved in the conversation. Also, we will be turning our attention and finding out why it is that James Bond may very well not be making a new appearance on the silver screen for some years to come. We'll get to the bottom of that also. Meanwhile, a slightly more serious story. In the case of the Army, 16,335 soldiers are either medically not deployable or have limited deployability, amounting to 23% of all troops. One has to wonder why, under the headline of 1/5 of armed forces are not fit to fight, admits the MOD. Have we got another service that isn't fit for purpose? Let's speak to Mark Francois, MP from Raleigh and Wickford, Shadow Defence Minister. Mark, very good evening to you.
Good evening.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk. So, look, we hear these stories. Inevitably, if you've got a fighting force of however many thousands, some of them are going to be out of operation at any one time. 1/5 of the armed forces not fit to fight, admitting the MOD. What's gone wrong?
Look, it is deeply worrying, and it's worst in the Army, where it's about 23% that aren't fully deployable. So we're talking nearly a quarter of the regular British Army that aren't fully fit to fight. And this is one of the reasons why earlier in the year, back in the spring, we announced a significant increase, we the Conservatives, in the defence budget to 2.5% of GDP by 2030 to try and put a number of problems in defence right, of which this was but one. But, you know, it is worrying that if we went to war tomorrow, there are quite a significant proportion of our armed forces who aren't fully fit to fight, and clearly we need to rectify that as a matter of urgency.
Well, you can say that the Conservatives made those changes or wanted to make those changes or increase the commitment a few months before you were unceremoniously sort of parcelled out of office. But some would say you've been in power for 14 years and you've done everything you can to undermine and denigrate the armed services and forces, which left us in the problem. So when Keir Starmer wants to point the finger of blame, he can adequately blame the Conservatives and say, well, we're clearing up your mess. How fair is that?
No, I don't think that's a fair characterisation, James. And let me explain why. When Russia invaded Ukraine, well, they first invaded in 2014, but when they re-invaded in 2022, you know, Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister, first one to go to Kyiv, absolutely stood literally shoulder to shoulder with Zelensky. And since then, relative to the size of our army, we've given more equipment to the Ukrainians than anyone else in NATO, including the United States. We were the first to give them main battle tanks. We gave them our Challengers, some of those. We've given them our AS-90 heavy artillery, large amounts of ammunition. It was the British NLAWs, you might remember, the sort of 21st century bazooka, if you like, that helped stop the Russian assault on Kyiv in the first crucial 48 hours. So we absolutely stood shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainians, but we gave them so much support that depleted our own war stocks, our own reserves, and this is something the Defence Committee of the House of Commons picked up on. I was serving on the committee at the time, before the election. So we announced that big increase in spending to replenish our war stocks, to put back what we'd given to Ukraine, and also to allow for an increase in the fighting capacity of the armed forces. The new head of the army, General Rollo Walker, said when he took over a few months ago, his opinion, not mine, we might have to fight a war against Russia within 3 years. So this is really serious. We provided that extra resource for rearmament, and it's very worrying that Labour won't match that. They keep talking about they'll spend 2.5%. They never put a date on it, so it's effectively meaningless. And the reason is, in simple terms, because our Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, doesn't do defence, doesn't get it, doesn't understand it, doesn't empathise, and she won't release the money.
You could happily...
Because of that, because of that, we're not as ready to fight as we should be. Well, and that's really worrying.
No, it is very worrying, and you could point that finger at Rachel from accounts in terms of anything that she says or does in terms of the policies that she's brought in. But one could argue and say it's the Tories' fault that Labour are in power because you didn't manage yourselves, you bustled out your leaders, you couldn't get behind Boris, and then you kind of imploded yourselves. How concerned are you that here we are, we've got a situation where no matter what leader you've got, you don't seem to be able to galvanise that response. You've got the Labour Party pulling themselves to pieces and putting in policies that are making them more unpopular than at any point, even under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And yet the Tory support or otherwise seems to be diminishing or certainly flatlining. And you've got the rise of Reform, who may very well have more members by the end of this year than the Conservative Party. It's not a great political place for the Conservatives to be in, is it?
Well, James, I mean, I'm not going to come on your programme and pretend we didn't lose the general election. I mean, it was a gruelling contest, and I remember it as well as anybody. But you're quite right. Since Labour have come in, I mean, I've been involved in politics one way or another for 40 years. I started as a student at university. I've never seen an incoming government kind of nosedive like this. I mean, we can reel it off. The winter fuel allowance, the passes for glasses, the waspy women, one thing after another. I've never seen a government become so out of touch with the people that elected them this quickly. And you mentioned Corbyn. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn got more votes in 2019 when Boris walloped him than Keir Starmer did in 2024. And this might be anecdotal, but in my constituency, Labour got just shy of 12,000 votes. I know they did. I saw them on the counting table at the count. But I can't find anyone now in my patch that admits to voting Labour. I mean, some of them must have.
I do agree with you.
Votes.
I agree with you. I think they've imploded, but surely that would, under normal political circumstances, that would be the opportunity for the Conservatives to get themselves back into contention. But it would appear as if Kemi Badenoch doesn't have any interest in putting forward policies that people can resonate with, and that's arguably why there is the rise of Reform. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the new year, Mark, but one of the things I do want to ask you about, since I'm sure you've got some views with your 40 years of political experience and expertise to deploy for us. Defining British culture. So, children are losing touch with British culture, according to somebody from the BBC. I would say that the BBC has probably had something to do with that, but anyway. How would you yourself define British culture, and what do you think threatens it?
Well, I read history at university. That was both my bachelor's and my master's degree, so I declare an interest. And when I see people attacking the history of the British Empire, trying to rewrite history, if you like, I think that's wrong. And I think we need to, in the national curriculum, I think we need to give people a far more balanced view of our history, and there's a great deal that we can be proud of as a nation. For instance, our role in 2 world wars fighting tyranny in Europe, and here we are again in the 21st century backing the Ukrainians fighting tyranny in Europe. In this case, it's in the form of Vladimir Putin. So I don't believe that the right way to commemorate what went on is to pull down statues and is to try and teach our children in schools a version of history which in some cases is based on critical race theory. I don't think that's balanced.
I think you could very well be onto something that will resonate. Meanwhile, I'm assuming that you'll be celebrating the time of the season, a little bit of Christmas festivities. And for you, does that mean traditional Christmas lunch or dinner tomorrow, Mark?
Yes, got dinner with the Christmas lunch with the family tomorrow. I'm going off to midnight mass in a few hours' time in my constituency. It's a great time for family. It's a time for people to come together, and it's a time when people in the Christian religion celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, but it's also a time when people of all faiths can come together. There was a comedian, James, you might remember, called Dave Allen.
Oh, certainly, Dave Allen.
My
Yeah,
father was a fan. You remember him?
Certainly do.
And he would always say, he always ended all of his shows with the same phrase. He would say, "Good night, and may your God go with you." Do you remember that?
Absolutely. And maybe
I think that's probably a good phrase to end on. So Merry Christmas to all, and may your God go with you.
Well, indeed. Well, as a North London-born Jewish individual, where the Christmas tree might very well be a Hanukkah bush, and I've always contested that the Jews do Christmas as pretty much as well as the Christians. As you say, it's a festival that everybody can get involved with and have some very entertaining and family time. Mark Francois, MP, Shadow Defence Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk. It's much appreciated. Meanwhile, let's get back to your comments about how you define British culture and what threatens it. Hazel is in Hampshire. Hazel, good afternoon, good evening.
There.
Hello.
Hello. I agree with the person you had before me. He's talking about our history and all of that sort of thing.
Well, that was Mark Francois, the MP.
That's right.
Yes.
And that's part of who we are. But another big part of who we are, more than working classes maybe, is our sense of humour. It's second to none, isn't it?
Well, you say that. I get myself in a lot of trouble, Hazel, because I remember the years gone by where people would say, "Oh, that Morecambe and Wise special, oh, it's fantastic." I never found Morecambe and Wise particularly amusing, Hazel. I never really liked them. I did like The Goon Show. I did like Monty Python. And I certainly like the two Ronnies. And I was watching an episode, which I mentioned earlier. I was watching the first episode of To the Man Born, because I've decided I want to rewatch that whole series.
I remember watching that.
Oh, there is so much of it that wouldn't be allowed today. And that's part of the problem, is that I do think British humour is fantastic, but I do think that people also have need to have the ability to be able to shock slightly with what they say, to offend slightly with what they say, and also to extract the Michael. Yes.
You know, we like leg pulling. You know, and when we do it to each other, we are well aware that we are pulling their leg.
We do. I particularly like...
on the receiving end, don't you?
Well, often. Yeah, but you see, the thing is, Hazel, I'm a very keen fan of the double entendre.
Yeah, me too. I love it.
Oh.
That's what I was going to come to, our language, because that is a big part of who we are and our sense of humour. Nobody speaks English like the English. People all over the world say they speak English. No, they don't.
Now,
they don't speak English like a native.
And where do you stand? Where do you stand on accents? Because I think that, for example, the accent has changed. I remember a few months ago, I was fortunate enough to be in an audience with Giles Brandreth, who I do think has now reached...
He's very posh.
He's very posh. But you see, I think he has reached national treasure status. But I asked him the question, I said, do you think that you would be able to be as popular and have the career that you've had if you were 20 years old with the accent you have?
No.
And he said, well, you know, he said his accent had actually changed over the years and it was far less posh than it used to be, yes. In the same way that if you listen to the late Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, later on in life, she sounded far less posh and clipped than she did in the early years.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, very much. But of course, you know, our accent, I mean, looking at Penelope Keith and how she spoke into The Man Born, you don't hear people with accents like that. I mean, apparently people say I'm posh. I don't think I am particularly, Hazel.
Well, I'm not posh. I come from Kent.
No, that's true. No, I could say that we all say that, Hazel, yeah.
Yeah, but we love to juggle with the language. We can laugh at ourselves. But the younger generation, they have no sense of humour whatsoever.
Well, I'm going to be looking through the glass to see if they... I don't know, they've been looking at me miserably, the younger generation. Do the younger generation... Just nod if you care. Do the younger generation have a sense of humour? Oh, one says yes, one says no.
Oh, there you go, you see, yeah. But we love to grumble, don't we?
We do, but then on the other hand...
We love to send everything up. Make a joke out of everything.
We do, but then, Hazel... If you go back, so when I was growing up, the older generation did a lot of tutting and shaking of head at my generation. They didn't like the comedy that I liked. They didn't like the young ones. They didn't like a whole range of comedies that came out. They didn't like alternative comedy. They didn't like Friday or Saturday Night Live. They didn't like any of that stuff.
Now, you're obviously a bit younger than me because I didn't watch all that. A lot of that is because I wasn't living in the country at the time.
Oh, I see. Well, then that would be the... I mean, they didn't like Lily Savage.
A lot, you know?
Yeah, they didn't like Lily Savage. Paul O'Grady.
I thought he, she, whatever, was really funny. I thought...
No, exactly. And I think you're right. I think every generation have their heroes, and maybe we just need to adapt a little bit. But Hazel, thank you very much indeed for calling. We'll take some more of your calls in a moment. 0344 499 1000. And don't go anywhere, because I think we're going to find out the answer as to why 007, Mr. Bond, will not be gracing our screens any time soon. We'll get the latest on that, all coming up on Talk.
The fact of the matter is, you've got to, obviously, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day? And we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, you know, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say, deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
Yeah,
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
9 minutes to 6 is the time this Christmas Eve here on Talk with me, James Max. I'm with you till 7 o'clock with your Drive Time show. So how do you define British culture and what threatens it is what I'm asking. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. You can send me a text, 87222. Start your text with the word talk, and you can X me at talkTV if you wish to. So we will take some more of your comments, and I'm really behind on all the texts and the comments. If you want to get to the front of the queue, we've got a couple of free lines free into the building. 0344 499 1000. Tell me what you think defines British culture and what threatens it. Now, you might think this is slightly off tangent here. The British spy, 007. Surely one of the great British icons. Surely part of British culture. 1962, Dr. No was released. I recently tried to watch that film, and I have to say I thought it was a little bit slow. However, the last outing, No Time to Die, That was in 2021. Where's the new Bond? Who's going to be the new writer of the film, the director? How are they going to bring it forward? When's it ever going to happen? Is there something going on behind the scenes? Well, I think it is. So we need to find out why there's no new Bond films, and there isn't even any discussion as to any new ones being made. Patrick von Sikorski is co-founder of cultpix.com and a film journalist. Patrick, very good evening to you. No Bond. It's a disaster. What's happened?
Good evening, James. And yes, I do expect you to talk. So what's happened with Bond is that there's a billionaire, bald-headed tech villain, namely Jeff Bezos, who's Amazon bought MGM Studios, the parent company of not just the Bond franchise, but also Rocky, Legally Blonde. And they're now at an impasse with Barbara Broccoli of Eon Productions, which is the home of James Bond. And they're just not seeing eye to eye about the new Bond, who's going to play him, what else they're going to do with it, because Amazon has all these ideas of doing a spin-off of Bond, maybe doing a Moneypenny series of film, and Barbara Broccoli is having none of it. So there's no story, there's no script, there's no new Bond.
So let me understand then. How can you own the rights for Bond through Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and then not be able to control the franchise? I'm assuming, presumably this is locked up in some legal difficulties or differences, which means that somebody owns one part of it, and unless both sides decide that they want to move forward, as you say, impasse.
You hit the nail on its head. So effectively, Amazon now has the right to all the old Bond films, but for anything new, they need to get approval from Eon Productions, and that's Barbara Broccoli and her stepbrother Michael Wilson, who inherited the Bond franchise from their father, Albert Covey Broccoli. And Amazon have come to them, apparently, and this is from a very good article in the Times and the Wall Street Journal that spoke to a lot of people behind the scenes. And effectively, every time they've come up with some wild-haired idea of what to do with Bond, Barbara Broccoli's reaction has been, have you read the contract? She has the final say in everything. So they did do a spin-off, I don't know if you remember, on Amazon Prime, called The Road to Million, a reality TV show in which 9 teams competed against each other for $1 million, and Brian Cox was semi-playing a Bond villain. Didn't do that well. I don't think that Barbara Broccoli was that thrilled with it. And also, don't forget, Amazon Prime has spent $1 billion on the Tolkien franchise with the Middle-earth, the Rings of Power. I think Barbara Broccoli took a look at that and said, interesting, not what I want for Bond.
And that's the point, isn't it? It's quite interesting. The Bond franchise, considered, I don't know as to whether relationships are sad, but Broccoli, she's been disparaging of Bond's new owners, who she described as, quote, idiots, unquote, according to the Wall Street Journal. And I'm afraid if you're going to refer to the people who, I don't know, perhaps at the distribution of the money or whatever it may be as idiots, then, as you say, it's probably not going to come true anytime soon. I mean, how important is it? I mean, it's really difficult, I suppose, for Bond on the basis that we've come to the end of the Daniel Craig era. He certainly can't appear as Bond again. It does need reinvention. It does need reincarnation. But also there are certain aspects to it which are, if you're not going to do Bond in a spectacular way with good stories, with good scripts, it could die as a franchise, couldn't it?
It definitely could die. And don't forget, when Daniel Craig came aboard as new Bond, everybody was saying, oh, Jason Bourne is having James Bond's martini lunch. It's an old franchise. They successfully reinvented it. But this time there's an additional element. The clock is ticking, because come 1st of January next year, there will only be 10 years left on the copyright of Ian Fleming's original novels of James Bond, which means that in 10 years' time, anybody can make a James Bond film. Disney could make a James Bond film. Richard Curtis could make a James Bond film. You could be in a James Bond film if you wanted to, because that's how copyright works. So how many films do you think you can churn out in 10 years if you haven't even cast a new Bond? Tick-tock, tick-tock.
Well, I think that could very well be the issue. And as you say, let's hope that they manage to reinvent that franchise before it dies. So, Patrick, thank you very much indeed for joining us and giving us some insight into that particular story. Patrick von Sychowski is co-founder of cultpix.com and a film journalist. Thank you. Wishing you a very Merry Christmas. Meanwhile, let's get back to British culture and how you define it and actually what threatens it. I mean, is Bond anything to do with it? Let's speak to Jason, who's in Sheffield. Hi, Jason.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So, how do you define British culture?
The English language.
And when you say the English language, is it how we deploy it, how we use it, how we speak it, how we write it?
It's all. It depends on two things. Since the advent of text messaging, I mean, if you printed out the text messages from 18 to 24-year-olds today, a pensioner would think it was in a foreign language.
Well, you've got a point there. But then on the other hand, when I went to work in America, which I did for a period of time, I thought that we spoke the same language. But, of course, we don't. We're, split by a common language in the sense that American deployment of language, the way they use different words, various other things, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble if you say the wrong things. In the same way that an American can, they talk about their pants. And it's just like, blimey, that's a bit of a bold shout. They say, where are my pants? It's just like, well, frankly, I don't want to know where your pants are. So language, of course, is an interesting one. Do you think that we need to teach it differently, or do you think that we need to simply evolve? Some people would say, well, texting and technology has meant that we communicate in a different way today, and it's just language evolving. It's always we don't speak in the same way that Shakespeare spoke. It's always evolving, and it will continue to do so.
The thing is, the English language has evolved over time, but it used to take hundreds of years. If you read a book from the 15th century, you wouldn't be able to read it because the words were different.
That's very true. As I studied Geoffrey Chaucer, I couldn't necessarily consider it or understand it. You certainly had to look into it, and I think that's perhaps that's the case, Jason. That the speed and pace of language and change has been such that maybe it's eroding our culture. There we are. Thank you for that. Wishing you a Merry Christmas. Meanwhile, still to come, we'll be turning our attention to some more big stories of the day. Plus, a Iron Lady will be making a return, as we'll be having some discussions with her about what she thinks. Plus, we'll be speaking to Rupert Bell about all those big royal stories, and maybe also the messages that we're going to get. That's all to come on Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Coming up to 3 minutes past 6 o'clock this Christmas Eve here on Talk with me, James Max. I'm with you till 7 o'clock. Still to come, we'll be turning our attention to homelessness. It is something that we do focus on at this time of year. It seems to come to the fore, so we'll be finding out a little bit about that. And also, we'll be having a slightly more in-depth conversation about children losing touch with British culture, according to a BBC chief, and specifically what that means. But I have been asking you during the course of this show, how do you define British culture and what threatens it? We'll take some more of your calls, and I'm sorry if I'm really behind on the text and the comments. So, these are the numbers you need. It's 0344 499 1000 to have a conversation. And if you want to talk about, yes, British culture and what threatens it, that's fine. But also, if you want to talk about what you're going to be doing this Christmas, I'd like to hear from you, because I'm going to be picking up the mother, the Wendy, who, if you did hear the last early breakfast, she came to review the papers. So the Wendy will be picked up later, and we'll be scooping her off down to the coast and seeing family and friends and various other things over the course of the next few days. But perhaps you're somebody who is spending Christmas on your own for either out of choice or a necessity. So happy to hear from you on what your plans are over the next 24 hours. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. And if that wasn't enough, a highlight of our TV schedules and our radio schedules is surely that royal speech from the King, which we're all looking forward to. We'll be getting the latest on all the royal news from Rupert Bell. That's all coming up on Talk. So I did mention to you that the telephone number is 0344 499 1000. How do you define British culture and what threatens it? But also, if you want to tell me about what you are up to over Christmas, very happy to hear from you, because for the first time in about a gazillion years, I'm not actually cooking tomorrow. No! So I was going to cook for the Wendy, a.k.a. my mother, and the next door neighbour said, do you want to come round? And I was like, yes, hello. Partly because the neighbour's a very good cook. And also, just because it's nice, you know, Christmas lunch with loads of people, and there'll be beers and glasses and things and stuff and whatever, and it's like, yeah, great. And also, if you eat at your neighbour's house and you eat a lot of chocolates and things, there's no calories there. If you eat them in your own home, woof, you might as well just, you know, expand yourself. Because we all overindulge at Christmas, don't we? I can't remember how many calories there are in a Christmas lunch, but I think it's quite a lot. But our turkey, and people malign the turkey. Oh, I love a roast turkey. Delicious. 0344 499 1000. I just got distracted there. I'm just thinking about quality of cooking. Oh, delicious. I could eat Christmas. I know that people sometimes say, oh, Christmas is so boring. Oh, I love it. The roast potatoes, after you get those right. Yes, please and thank you. Anyway, 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. How do you define British culture and what threatens it? And I'm really surprised that in our conversations there's been very little royal chat. And I think it's arguably because the royal family, since the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth, has perhaps rather changed in terms of its importance to our culture and what it means to us. I sort of hope that that institution doesn't die away. I mean, if it does, it'll have far less to do. Rupert Bell is Talk's royal correspondent. What would he do without a bit of royal chat and scandal and chit-chat and everything else? Rupert, good evening to you.
Good evening, James. I really don't know. I go back to covering sport more or less most of the time, I suppose, rather than royal chat. But this is a busy time of year for the royals. They all get together. We'll see them tomorrow morning in Sandringham, making the walk to the church, which... When do you think 12 months ago, what happened just 3 weeks later, obviously it all unravelled with both the Princess of Wales and the King undergoing hospital treatment, and the year looked very different. But, you know, we saw the happy pictures 12 months ago, but a lot has happened in that intervening period for the royal family to try and regroup and, I suppose, maintain their relevance, you know, in the eyes of talking about British culture. You know, with the Queen being such a dominant force, the King is having to navigate his way through into the consciousnesses of the British public in terms of what his constitutional role is and how he fits in and what
Now, there has been a lot of conversation about, as you say, the health of the royals. People will be looking towards the King and Queen as to their health, looking at William and Kate, who have had their own annus horribilis, I think it's been described in terms of their health, and indeed, in particular, her health. But it would appear as if both of them have come through to the other side, seemingly much better, which is wonderful news. I'm assuming that we're not going to see sight nor sound of Andrew. You know, in the past, he sort of walked along sort of quietly behind them, but still been in vision. I'm assuming that this year, no Andrew.
I'm pretty sure not. I can't, unless there's a last-minute invitation to go to Sandringham, I can't see it happening. No.
No. OK, well, that's fair enough. Now, Sandringham always interests me, because I've been to Sandringham and had a look around the house and everything else, as one can do as a member of the public. And I was quite surprised by the place. It's absolutely filled with tut. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I was expecting a nice royal residence with classy out, you know, pieces and everything else. And it's just filled with absolute tut. I mean, do they enjoy it there? Do you know what, you know, gets on? I suppose they only go once a year, so it is what it is. But, I mean, do they enjoy it or not really?
I think they do. You know, they get together tonight. I think they do the presents tonight. They have a bit of a meal tonight. Then they get ready for church, and then it's sort of games, I think. I think they do enjoy going to Sandringham. There's going to be 40-odd people there for lunch, extended family. So I think it's going to be quite a do for them.
OK, quite a do. Well, one likes quite a do. In terms of, you know, royal stories, as you say, do you think the royal family has done enough to ingratiate itself into, I suppose, a new era where, for all of us alive, the only person that we knew as the head of state, as the, you know, the leader of, you know, that institution, that family, was Queen Elizabeth. It's always tricky taking over from somebody who's that good, that popular, even though Charles has been, you know, in the wings and waiting for so many years. I've had the pleasure of being in the same room as him. He's enormously, you know, effusive, very effective communicator. He's very funny. He's a great speaker. He's really prepped for this job. Having said that, the Queen, when she came to the throne, was very young and was able to instill perhaps, you know, a different sense and sentiment to that role, whereas he is but a caretaker, one would say.
He is a caretaker, but you actually look at where Britain was in the 50s to when it was when the Queen died. The cultural shift, the change, enormous. Whereas the King is here and now, and he's got to take up the reins and leave, as you say, that he's a changing of the guard for William, because he knows, and it's been highlighted this year, his own mortality, that he's probably not, well, if he get 10, 15 years, you just don't know.
OK, so let's just take that point, and then I've been asking those who are listening and, you know, to get involved in the conversation, how you define British culture and actually what threatens it. I mean, if, for example, the monarchy were to be threatened in terms of their existence or popularity or otherwise, that would have a very significant undermining of British culture. How important do you think monarchy and the royal family are to that British culture? I mean, you know, everybody has a piece of royal memorabilia or something kicking around their house. I mean, you've got stamps with their faces on, you've got coins with their faces on. I've got mugs in the beach hut with Andrew and Sarah on, because, I mean, I love that, you know, because if somebody drops them on the floor, nobody cares. But, you know, I think, you know, culturally speaking, the royal family, very important to the nation.
Absolutely. Look, it's this, you know, 1066 and all that. It defines us. We are defined as a monarchy. Of course, there are going to be some dissenters and saying should we be having a monarchy? But until they can come up with something that actually is a better system, do we just want maybe another ex-politician being our head of state, if that's the way we go? That's the problem for what do you bring in? And the royal family is definitely something that defines British culture historically throughout the years. You know, Buckingham Palace, you know, people look at this country and define it with its monarchy. And the King is fully aware of that. And he's got to make sure that he's seen to be embracing all sides. And hence the reason why he's going to non-denominational church for his Christmas message.
Well, I'm not surprised by that, given the problems within the Church of England, of which I guess he's nominally head. I guess you wouldn't want to touch that organisation with a barge pole. But let's just talk a little bit about the speech, just before we bring in the words of, our other spiritual leader. In terms of what he's going to say, he is breaking from tradition. He is doing it from this chapel sort of connected to a hospital. And I suppose, illustrating his own, whether it's mortality or indeed health battles. It doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor, royal or not. You're going to have to face health issues, and sometimes, they can be a real challenge.
They can be, and I think he is a deeply religious man, and obviously he is head of the church, the Anglican Church, which has obviously had its own annus horribilis, without question. So, but he does want to try and be a monarch for all. And it means this is a place where people can go, not just Christians, but all people. And I think that's again symbolic, that he wants to make sure that he's seen to be king for all. But it's a difficult negotiating sort of path, because obviously he is the head of the Anglican Church. But I mean, I'm sure he's been exasperated by what's going on within it. And there's a lot of dissenting voices within its own organisation. But for the king, it's very important to highlight his faith, but to make sure that faith then can embrace all other faiths and bring them together. And I'm sure that will be part of his message tomorrow afternoon.
I'm certainly sure that it will be. Meanwhile, we've created our own very own, I suppose, voice of reason and common sense for our station and our programme. What would Margaret say? What would Margaret do? Is perhaps the inspiration behind it. But I think that, Rupert, I'd like to. There she is. I'd like to perhaps reflect with you as to what a Iron Lady might have to say about maybe the governance of our nation.
Under my leadership, I abolished the GLC. Some imbecile decided an authority and London mayor was a good idea. Now look, you have Sadiq Khan. My handbag has more common sense than that man. Talking of common sense, who created 20-mile-an-hour speed limits? Who invented double baby buggies or the plastic bottle tops that cannot be unattached from the bottles? And which buffoon got rid of the sparkly quality street wrappers, replacing them with dull paper ones? They've ruined Christmas.
Well, there we go. You see, that's from a Iron Lady. I think she's got a point, hasn't she, Rupert?
I'm not going to disagree with much that she said.
I told you she's the voice of common sense. More Margaret.
Good old Margaret, yes. The 20-mile-an-hour thing, that does my head in. I keep getting speeding tickets. But there we go. So, but I'm sure the voice of reason rattling a few cages there, nothing like that to set it up for Christmas. As we go forward into much love and Christmas greetings to all. But Margaret saying as it is.
There we go. Rupert Bell, Talk's Royal Correspondent. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening here on Talk. It's much appreciated. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas, and thank you for your insight into the royal stories. And indeed, getting excited about the words of a Iron Lady, who I'm sure Kevin in Basingstoke is happy to hear from, because for him, I dare say, Margaret was a cultural icon. Kevin in Basingstoke, good evening.
Morning. I mean, I'm saying morning, James, because I'm used to saying good morning.
Well, I know. Well, we're all used to saying good morning, but after 7 years, frankly, that was enough.
Yeah, I've missed you. I've missed you and Christo, even though you used to both insult me on a regular basis.
I've never insulted anybody in my life, Kevin, you fool.
No, not much.
OK, what nonsense are you going to come out with today?
Well, I mean, the first caller saying that, the royal family, I mean, after that Channel 4 documentary, I don't respect somebody that makes money from the NHS, charities, the Lifeboat Society.
So he should just hand over his property for free and not make any return from it?
Well, I mean, his property, making money from the NHS. I mean, that is not...
Well, loads of people make money from the NHS. Are you going to tell me that nobody can make money from the NHS? What about the drug companies that develop drugs and sell them? What about individuals who are paid over and above? What about contractors who build the hospitals, who make and take a profit? What about every single contractor who does anything, who will line their pockets as a result of what they do with the NHS? So nobody is allowed to make any money from the NHS. Come on, Kevin, live in the real world. You haven't got a Scooby-Doo.
Money out the NHS. He's got enough money. He's one of the richest men on the planet.
That's not the point. You can't say, oh, he's got enough money. What's enough? You know, what's enough to you may not necessarily be enough for him. He might need to run his household. He might need to run the institution. There are all sorts of things. It's not your money.
Pay for his household. We pay for his household.
Well, you don't pay for his household. You pay for the official costs, if you like, of the royal family, and that comes through a settlement that was made years ago when the royal family gave up their property. They handed it over to the state in return for money being provided for the institution. So the Crown Estate is largely owned by us, you know, the people, the government, and producing returns. And then we use a small amount of that to fund the royal family and its official operations.
Well, he was making money. If you live on the Crown Estate, you don't make a will. He was using that money to do up his own private properties.
Yeah, but hang on a second. But the Crown Estate isn't his property. So the Crown Estate, if that's the case with the Crown Estate, then that's the state doing that. That's nothing to do with the king.
No, but he came to the whole thing was set up. The laws were made in his benefit.
Yeah, but if you're talking about the duchy, yeah, but Kevin, if you're going to have a pot shot at certain aspects of either ownership or otherwise of the king's property and where he gets his money, you get your facts right. So if you're talking about the Crown Estate, then none of that is owned by the king or controlled by the king, and it's nothing to do with them other than the fact that they receive a percentage of the money in order to run the official mechanics, if you like, of the royal family. So that's one side of it. If you're talking about his own personal private wealth from the Duchy of Lancaster or anything else, you shouldn't expect anybody not to take a rent for property that they own, whether they've got a lot of it or little of it.
Yeah, but he didn't earn all what he's got. He just took it from others, didn't he? He didn't. I just killed people for it.
No, he didn't.
Well, his family, as years went by.
Well, listen, if you want to go back in history, if you want to go... Yes, but if you want to go back in history, Kevin, then every single thing that we either own or that we've done or can all be pulled to pieces, and there's somebody who could perhaps make a claim. But you haven't. I mean, you know, your life, my life, we are, you know, you're just trying to get something for nothing.
What, like him?
Well, no, not like him. Kevin, I'll come back to you in a second. This is Talk.
The fact of the matter is, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day, and we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
Yeah,
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
So, 22 minutes past 6 o'clock, still to come on, we'll turn our attention to a problem that is perhaps highlighted at Christmas, which is homelessness, and we'll be speaking to Alex Bax from Pathway, which is a leading homeless charity, talking about that. But before then, we were talking to somebody whose brain, I think, is homeless because it's not in his head, and that's Kevin, who's in Basingstoke. Hi, Kevin!
Hi, James.
I just find that whenever you put together an argument, it's sort of nonsensical. But let's just get back to this idea of sort of culture or otherwise. Do you think that British culture has either diminished, or do you think it's threatened?
Well, I think British culture to me is treating other people like you want to be treated yourself, especially asylum seekers and immigrants, because they are demonised by the far-right media or the right-wing media.
Yeah, but if somebody arrives on on our shores illegally, there are plenty of ways to come legally if you want to. And you can say, oh, they don't have any money. Well, they've just spent thousands of pounds, in order to get here. So I assume that they don't do so legally because they know they would be rejected. So they come having destroyed all their passports and all that sort of business, so they can't be deported. There are a lot of people up and down the nation, Kevin, who would say, of course we're compassionate and of course we want to help. But when 40,000 people a year plus are arriving by small boats, it's not acceptable because there are legal routes. And also when you've got net migration of 6, 7, 800,000 in a year, that's just too many.
Well, we're a member of the Refugee Convention, so, they are allowed to come here and claim asylum. And a lot of these
But not by a small boat, they're not.
A lot of these people haven't got passports because...
Yeah, because they've destroyed them.
...countries where they don't go...
Because they've destroyed them, Kevin.
They have passports.
They've destroyed them. So would you say... look, I'm all for legal forms of whether it's refugee status or migration or immigration. As I've said before on shows that I presented here and elsewhere, if it wasn't for immigration, I wouldn't be here. I'm sort of third generation as a result. So... you have a look at a nation where we had net migration, 30,000, 60,000, 90,000, even 100,000. That's still a lot of people to come net in a year. When you have migration over 1 million people coming in 1 year, and net migration 6, 7, 800,000, the size of a medium-sized city almost, trying to get new homes to be integrated into our society. It's just too many, Kevin. We can't afford it. We can't deal with it.
We do need these people coming here because
we don't.
If we didn't need them, they wouldn't be granted a visa. The reason
we don't need them.
Visa is because we need them.
Yeah, we don't need that many, Kevin.
Well, why do we give them that many visas then?
I don't know, because we're governed by an incompetent government who have not controlled immigration for generations, and as a result of that, we've seen a mass change in our culture, a mass change in our nation, where we haven't been able to integrate people. We've got people up and down the nation who can't even speak the language because we don't have the resources to help people to learn the language.
Well, my culture hasn't been changed with mass immigration. I think it's been enhanced. I love seeing all these people from other countries coming here. What's wrong with them?
Well, there's nothing wrong with them, and there's nothing wrong with a range of cultures. But there is something wrong if you have, if your nation is overwhelmed. Why do you think we've got a waiting list of millions of people waiting for health procedures? Why do you think we've got a housing crisis, Kevin?
Well, people that come here on work visas have to take out insurance,
and they're young people, they're not clogging up the NHS, are they?
So you're just blaming old people?
Well, no. I mean, 2/3 of the NHS budget is spent on old people. These people that are coming here are not old people, are they? They're not pensioners.
Well, and you're saying that they never use the health services? They don't need houses?
They have to have insurance. If you come here on a work visa, you have to have insurance. If you come here as a student, you have to have insurance.
Okay, so you don't think that the 8 million extra people that we've had arrive in this country in the last, say, 15 years has got anything to do with the shortage in resources that we have?
It might be a tiny bit, but the thing that they benefit the country more than they take out.
Right,
I mean,
OK, well, there's an argument. I'm not sure many people will agree with you, Kevin. Me included. Anyway, wishing you a very Merry Christmas and thank you for your call. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. How do you define British culture and what do you think threatens it? But let's talk about something else which is very prolific across the time and certainly perhaps it's something that comes sharper into focus as we think about maybe others as we head towards our families or friends for Christmas. Joining me now is Alex Back, CEO of Pathway, which is a leading homelessness charity. Homelessness isn't just for Christmas, but it's something I'm assuming that, should be dealt with throughout the year, but it has become particularly acute, particularly as we've seen cost of living crisis and various other things. Alex, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk. Let me just ask you, or start with asking you, how serious is homelessness across the UK right now?
Hi, James. Good to talk on this Christmas Eve. I'm afraid it's very serious. It's been going up, roughly being up 27% in the last year. 123,000 households living in temporary accommodation, so-called, as we speak. That includes 160,000 children spending Christmas. PA is probably a room, maybe in a bed and breakfast or in some kind of unpleasant accommodation, maybe without cooking facilities, and those kids are having Christmas in those kind of places. So yeah, in London, I think they work out it's one child in 23 this Christmas is in a homeless form of accommodation. So yeah, it's a serious problem.
And it's a serious problem. Does one need to play the blame game, or do we just need to sort it out?
I mean, you were talking about history in your brief. There are reasons why we are where we are today, but it's a fixable problem, so we just need to sort it out, would be our view.
And in terms of sorting it out, I mean, this government has been talking about building 300,000 homes a year. A lot of people up and down the nation would say, where are you going to get the money from and how do you deal with it? I'm assuming, though, that we need an awful lot of social housing, we need affordable housing, we need housing where it's actually required. And so far, there's been very little. I mean, they've actually put down the requirement for housing in London, and put it up in sort of places around the country. It sounds as if we've got politicians who don't really understand how to solve the housing crisis.
Homelessness, if you like, is the sharp end of it's the symptoms of the wider long-term housing crisis. You're quite right. But yeah, we would definitely agree. We need at least 90,000 new social rented affordable homes in the country every year for a substantial period of time to begin to make a difference. Before that, however, there's some things which could be done more rapidly. For example, so we're a homeless health charity. Good evidence that if the NHS invested a certain amount of money, so not nothing but not masses, in what we call specialist intermediate care facilities for homeless people leaving hospital, we can help them resolve their homelessness and save the NHS money, because if you leave people on the street, unsurprisingly, it's a very dangerous place. Particularly at Christmas, it's a place where you get sick and you will end up coming into the health service and using resources. So ending homelessness actually takes pressure off the health service, which is something we all need to see.
One of the areas of homelessness that we've seen, particularly recently, is perhaps the proliferation of former service people who have actually been in service of the nation. And that's arguably because of cuts in various different kinds of funding or otherwise. Where are these people who are now homeless coming from? Is it refugees? Is it people from the services, or is it from just everywhere?
So services actually is quite a rare phenomena, and I have to say that if any of so we support a number of teams in hospitals around the country. If they ever find someone with a service history, there are so many lovely charities out there that you can really sort someone out. So that the service people homelessness thing is a little bit of a myth, I would say. In London, yes, a certain percentage of the patients, about 20% of the patients we see in hospital, have immigration issues or those kind of backgrounds, 80% other. And really, they're people, a very big cause of homelessness is the end of a private rented accommodation tenancy. So they're people who've not been able to pay the rent. Back to the housing crisis, you can see often that may have come with you losing your job, and suddenly you can't make the rent payment, and yeah, there you are. You're approaching the council for help. If you're a single man, the council doesn't really have to help you. It will give you a leaflet and point you at some other private landlords. And if you've got no deposit, well, there you are. You have nowhere to go.
And in terms of solving this problem and perhaps what people could do as we head towards the festivities or otherwise, I'm assuming you would like people to be thinking, at least in their mind's eye, as to what Pathway and perhaps other charities do as well. What are the sorts of things that you'll be doing over the festive time to help those who are homeless?
So interestingly for us as a charity, so as I said, we support specialist teams in hospitals. Actually, because of the amazing work that so many other charities do over Christmas, like Crisis famously, and many others, many churches, Open Provision, actually the number of homeless people who end up in hospital goes down over Christmas, which shows that when we put lots of good things out for people, they don't get sick and they don't come into hospital. So I have to say some of our teams actually get a little bit of a breather at this time of year. So we would encourage people to support your local charity, support your local church or services who are out there helping, and perhaps also put some pressure on. You've talked about politics. Put some pressure on your MP. We have a campaign on our website asking people to back our call to end the discharge of anyone who's homeless from hospital to the street, and that investment I've talked about would do that. So perhaps back our campaign, put pressure on the government to end this problem.
And if people want to find out more about Pathway, where do they go?
Do visit our website, pathway.org.uk, and a lot of information there. And indeed, we are a charity, so donations hugely welcome at any time of year. And as you said at the beginning, homelessness is not just for Christmas, I'm afraid, but it is a solvable problem, and that's something we can all think about at Christmas.
Alex, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk. That's Alex Bax, CEO of Pathway, a leading homelessness charity, giving you his thoughts as we head into the festive period. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number to get involved in that conversation, defining British culture. But also, I will turn to your text, and if you want to join that conversation, you can do so. And still to come, we will also be finding out a little bit more about this children losing touch with British culture. Warning from the BBC. Well, we'll be speaking to a child psychologist to find out how we can fix that. We're fixing everything today. We'll do some more fixing in a few moments' time here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
6:36 is the time. It's me, James Max, with you till 7 o'clock. I'm slightly distracted by some of the comments and texts which have come in. James, you asked the question, how do you define British culture and what threatens it? I do not wish to appear pedantic, but the notion that you put forward is a non sequitur, as there is no longer a harmonious society in the UK due to mass and uncontrolled immigration. The question you should be asking is what we've lost to be English. Season's greetings, best wishes for 2025. That's from Leo. This one says, Mike in Swindon. Good evening, James. Lovely to see you. Wishing yourself and all at Talk a happy Christmas, wonderful New Year. Many thanks for your efforts throughout the year. I always think when somebody says, oh, good effort, it means that you weren't that good, but it'll do. There we go. Colin in the West Midlands says, great show, James. Thank you, Colin. What threatens British culture? It's gone past a threat. Britain is already beyond repair now. All we can do is slow it down. The Tories should be totally ashamed of what they've allowed this country to become. With their mass immigration over the last 14 years, Labour will be even worse, he goes on to say. If you landed 5 miles from where I live, you wouldn't know if it was in Birmingham or somewhere else in the world. And then he goes on to say that some people hate this country. I'll be voting reform from now on. Even bringing immigration down to net zero is only slowing down the inevitable. Oh. Greg and Carol says, good to see and hear you again, James, on Talk. Happy Christmas, and as you're not on tomorrow, happy Hanukkah too. Thanks, Greg and Carol. Meanwhile, a generation of children at risk of losing their connection to British culture, according to a BBC programming-in-chief, has warned. Well, how true is that? Let's speak to Kim Lee, who is a child psychologist. Joins me now. Kim, good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
Yeah, very well indeed, thank you. So, a generation of children at risk of losing their connection to British culture. This is from somebody at the BBC. Arguably, the BBC should be to blame for this, aren't they?
Well, according to Patricia Hidalgo, who made the comment, and the summit that was held in February 2024 to look at how cultural media and discoverability were failing, there is a view that the sorts of programming that happened decades ago, not that many decades ago, has been usurped by streaming services that are much bigger, much more powerful, much more accessible. And I think, we have to see this in context rather than the headline. I think we have to understand the story, and the story appears to be one where figures have declined exponentially where children's television is concerned. Budgets have been reflecting the lack of preparedness to actually make more content. And so I think if we see it in that context, then it provides a slightly wider picture. But I think the other thing we have to understand is I think the notion of culture, I mean, I've heard you've been listening for a little while now, this question of culture, I really think that needs to be defined in a more accessible way. Now, in my practice, as a clinician, I see children and young people, and I would say that the majority of those from as young as 4 or 5 will have access to TikTok, YouTube, over and above things like television.
And do you think that's part of the problem? That, in a sense, we have, of course, had significant technological advancements, social, digital media, tablets, all sorts of computers and things which have become available. We know that legislation, laws, rules take a while to catch up. And part of the reason that maybe we've seen a decline, particularly in the commercial provision of whether it's television or content, is because we decided that there was significant harm being caused to children by exposure to certain kinds of advertisements and certain kinds of messaging. In particular, we talk about sweet foods or sugary foods or fatty foods and all of that. So all of that money went. We have now seen a whole explosion in the adoption of social and digital media, which, of course, has no control over its editorial content or messaging, and indeed is much more global in its nature. So we've caused this by taking away the fact that somebody suddenly decided, no, you shouldn't have an advert for a burger or a chicken. That means that the programme's no longer funded and provided. When it's no longer funded and provided, people and children just turn their attention to either, as you say, streaming services or the TikToks and other digitals of our realm.
Well, I agree with you. I think that's absolutely right. But I think what's also the case is that we as adults model how to be people. Small people take their cues from us. And if you think about the number of adults who are accessing different streaming services, then it becomes normalized. So, I mean, these things are never a sort of silver bullet resolution any more than they're a one-dimensional problem. The concern, if we look at it from the point of view of not just the context of culture, but if we look at it from the point of view of what are the dangers, what is the harm that children may encounter as a consequence of all social media platforms, then we're into very, very big territory.
We are into exactly. We are into big territory, and as you say, policing that and governing that is nigh on impossible. Gene is out the bottle, arguably. But then also, should we be looking at organisations like the BBC and saying, well, you know, where is your children's programming? You stuck it on, you know, a children's channel, CBBC, which might be a good idea, but you don't put children's programming, largely speaking, on the main terrestrial channels, which means that parents don't necessarily put it on. So instead of having children's programming, you have Pointless or, you know, Homes Under the Hammer or anything else that they might do. And on Saturday mornings, because you decided that it was either too expensive, too costly or too difficult, you took away children's programming off a Saturday morning. And maybe in response to parents saying, you know, we want to take our children to actually do something as opposed to sitting on their, you know, largely fattening rear ends, watching telly. And we've ended up with a whole load of cooking programmes instead, and there is no mainstream children's programming.
Well, there's a kind of sense of you can't have it both ways, can you? And it seems to me that what Patricia Hidalgo is saying is that she believes it to be a European problem, that European investment and planning needs to contribute to what she sees as a worsening situation, which is at the very least going to impact, and to quote her, on the isolation, the mental health and anxiety that children may experience as a consequence. I have to be honest, I think, although that's a quote that I think was from the Bernardo submission, I've not seen, had access to the research that underpins that. We do know that there's a good deal of research into what happens where this reliance upon social media is concerned. I think that the thing that I would really be looking for is what is meant by cultural, not normality, I can't think of the right word, but we do live in a society where the definition of culture is constantly evolving for a whole host of reasons. And I think that if there needs to be, and she has called for, a kind of reset in terms of defining a whole range of things, not least of which the discoverability of cultural content, as it's referred to.
Well, there are a whole range of things that make me despair, whether it's the deployment of our language or indeed the lack of ability by many to be able to make a decent cup of tea. Anyway, there we go. We could probably talk about this the whole time, but Kim, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening on Talk. It's much appreciated. That's Kim Lee, child psychologist, talking about children losing touch with British culture. And I think also identifying that culture is so wide and complex and difficult to define, which is why I've been asking you, how do you define British culture and what threatens it? We'll take your calls next on Talk.
the fact of the matter is, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day? And we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, you know, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
That was...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
6:48 is the time. It's me, James Max, with you till 7 o'clock, and it'll be Russell Quirk taking you through into the evening this Christmas Eve here on Talk. So, talking to you about how you define British culture and what threatens it. And also, we did have our a Iron Lady. And Bam has been in touch. Not my dog. Bam has been in touch, presumably the famous DJ. What AI application do you use to get the celebrity voices? As if I'm going to tell you that. Anyway, James, you asked what defines British culture. I think you could not have asked this at such a dreadful time. I feel I cannot answer. As we're going through such a dreadful time, thanks to Labour, and as for Starmer, and we hope he doesn't return from his Christmas break, says Phil. Hi again, James. What threatens British culture? The answer is simple and somewhat unpalatable. The terrorist army that's forming in our midst as a result of mass and uncontrolled immigration. Dear, oh dear. Mark's in Lincolnshire. Hello, Mark.
Hi again, James. You all right, buddy?
Yes, very good, thank you, Mark. So what can you tell me?
Yeah, it was kind of follow-on from, I think, when we last spoke. You had a caller on, I think it was just a caller, that you had on a little while ago there, pretty recently. He was talking about how he loves all the refugees and all.
Oh, that was Kevin. This one says, I thought you were being a bit harsh on Kevin until he started talking about immigration. I now agree with you. He has no brain. He's a cretin. I think that's a little bit... Yeah,
well, I mean, the main question I would always ask anybody that has the attitude like that, which is quite a left-wing attitude, actually, and that is, well, OK, then, so how many are you going to house in your home, personally? Because we keep bringing them in the numbers we're bringing them in. Eventually, that's what they're going to want us to do. They're going to want us to house them in...
I mean, all political parties have said that there is a manageable and an unmanageable number, and you can argue about what that number is. But if you have a look in history, this country managed to absorb net migration of between 50 and 100,000 people a year, which is actually rather a lot of people if you have a look at that in the context of towns and villages up and down the nation. Yeah. But when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people net, which means that, say, for example, you have our net number this year, I think, which was, 660,000. But you actually have a look at the gross number, which is about 1.3 million. So that means that 1.3 million people came to this country. That's an awful lot of people that you've got to find houses for, that have got to learn the language, that have got to be integrated into the system, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's tough.
Well, for me, James, the scam of immigration, which is why I'm so anti it at this point, because I think we've just got to a point where it just needs to stop entirely for 5 to 10 years, just for us to catch up, and also to force government to actually fix the problems with your unemployment levels and all the rest of it.
But would you move it? But you can't move it to a level where nobody is able to move, because I think one of the great things that we have in this country is that we have a freedom. So if, for example, you were fortunate enough that you had the ability to either go on holiday or indeed sell and take your money and whatever it is, you could move abroad if you wanted to. Having that freedom to be able to move is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can, on a temporary basis, you could have like 5 to 15, 20,000 a year. That's an acceptable level. But the problem is, and this is the issue, again, that so many people seem to miss for some reason. And it's just a never-ending cycle.
And I suppose that the never-ending cycle is that there hasn't been a proper conversation about this, and therefore it has become toxic. Mark, thank you so much for that. Just moving on, because it wouldn't be a Christmas show. As we move into Christmas Eve, it wouldn't be a discussion unless we covered chocolate. And I think chocolate is a very important part of Christmas Day, whether it's the cheapies or the more expensive ones, or indeed something delicious or otherwise. We need to speak to somebody who owns a chocolate business. Haifa Johar is owner of Bloom Delight Luxury Chocolate. Haifa, very good evening to you.
Hello. Hi, James. Good evening to everyone.
Haifa, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So, you own a company called Bloom Delight Luxury Chocolates, and I've had the pleasure, actually, in the past of eating them, tasting them. I mean, we're talking high-end stuff, aren't we?
Yes. A luxury chocolate made with good quality ingredients, healthier options, made for everybody artistically. So everybody would like a good chocolate that looks so good as well.
I mean, there are a lot of different chocolates. I mean, do you sort of wring your hands in horror at the likes of whether it's Mondelez, they own Cadbury, the fact that people, you know, will dive into what they call chocolates, but they're Quality Street or Celebrations, all that sort of stuff. I mean, they're not really a fine chocolate. I mean, I'd rather enjoy them, but they're basically just a vehicle for sugar, whereas pure chocolate, luxury chocolate, is a very different thing, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. The process of making those kind of chocolates is completely different. They're made with fine cocoa beans, with real cocoa butter. The cocoa butter is not removed from the cocoa itself and replaced with something like palm oil, as we see in the supermarkets everywhere. The ones that we see on the shelves available to everybody, they made to suit the people who are not looking to spend so much on chocolate. To suit everybody, they're chocolate on the go, if you want to say that. So
mass produce for the masses. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit then about maybe I just need to ask you, how on earth did you get into chocolate? Because I think when I was growing up, there are lots of things that you could do. Either becoming a broadcaster or a route into, lots of different jobs. And chocolate making, surely. People like, how on earth did you make it into chocolate making?
Oh, surprisingly, I'm a nutritionist and dietitian originally. During my work as a dietitian, a lot of people used to ask me, please can you make that certain time, but please do not remove the chocolate or try to reduce it so much. And I always tried to look for healthier options for them in the supermarkets, but there was nothing there that they would really like. It wasn't enticing enough, or we lacked in the variety of options. That's how it occurred to me, and from my work as a scientist as well, why don't I develop chocolate that suits variety of needs, all dietetic preferences, and make it in an artistic way. Because a lot of people associate healthy foods, like healthy chocolates, with boring chocolates, the ones that are, on the shelf. Nobody looks at them. So I wanted to make them more enticing, more, seducing to those people who want healthier options with higher quality taste and ingredients and real flavors.
But per chocolate, if I have one of your chocolates, I think every celebration or every Quality Street is what, 35, 40 calories. How much is one of your chocolates in calorific terms?
Yes. In calories, it doesn't always differ from, they're not high in sugar, they're higher in cocoa butter. So they're not as high in chocolate. And I always keep options for people, for example, if they're looking for milk chocolates rather than dark or semi-dark. But the thing is, it's not about the calories, it's about what we choose to put in the ingredients.
And I think that's the key. Now, if people want to find out more about Bloom Delight Luxury Chocolates, where can they find you?
Oh, we're on the website online because people can customize their orders as well for events. So we're online right now. We do pop-up shops every now and then, but we announce it on the website.
There we go. Bloom Delight, luxury chocolate. Hey, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Wishing you a very merry Christmas and indeed season's greetings. There we go. Hey, for Joe High is owner of that particular chocolate company. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Meanwhile, it's almost time for me to pop off and sort of more worry about Christmas matters. Meanwhile, you'll be in the finance of Russell Burke, who's here. Hello. Hey, good evening. Good evening. And to you. So, what's happening on your show tonight?
So we're going to start sensibly, and then we'll go downhill from there. Okay. So we're going to talk about the economy, the fact that Rachel Reeves has still decided, you may talk about this, not to rule out further tax cuts. You wouldn't think that by now...
Tax rises, you mean?
Tax rises, sorry, yeah.
She could rule in tax cuts any day.
Sorry, yes. So you would imagine those kind of 6 months in, and now 3 months after the budget, she would realise the damage that's been done, and she might actually give us a bit of reassurance rather than keeping the negativity going. So we're going to talk about that.
Did you enjoy AI and Margaret? Did you do well?
I cannot begin to describe how thrilled I am.
I kind of donated it to the station.
Yeah, no, I think it's an icon. Yes, it's an icon. She's done well.
You're done with the AI thing.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it myself. Yes. Yeah, well, I'm smart speaking.
That idea, trademark, you heard here first.
Yeah. So we're tracking Santa, by the way. That's the main feature. We're going to be tracking Santa across the globe and letting everybody know when...
Do you refer to this in the Santa? I always called him Father Christmas.
I say Father Christmas. I think that's... I mean, I did when I was a kid, I think Santa's a bit more of a grown-up thing, didn't you?
Right. Oh, I don't care.
Does it matter? No. Anyway, so we'll be anticipating what it's about to deliver.
Right. Well, let's hope it delivers some cheer somewhere in the country.